This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
It is 3 minutes after 10, and it's almost tempting, isn't it? Despite the backdrop of tragedy and carnage, it's almost tempting to reflect for a moment longer on that curious sort of sense of unity that hung over the country after Vladimir Putin mounted his illegal invasion of Ukraine. I can't remember something, except possibly the football. No, the football doesn't work, does it? Because there's no UK or Great Britain team. I can't remember the last time. Maybe the Olympics in 2012. A couple of weird Tories were complaining about there being too many. I forget which minority they were cross about in the opening ceremony. But generally speaking, when was the last time you felt that the country was speaking almost as one on a given subject? It's a really good question, that, actually. Why don't you try and answer it on the texts and the WhatsApps? 03456060973 for the WhatsApp, 84850 for the text. At times the country in your lifetime has been pretty much united, speaking almost as one. There were exceptions, of course there were. But even the president of the UK branch of the Vladimir Putin fan club, Nigel Farage, I think, was wise enough to keep his gob shut rather than speaking out in support of Putin after the invasion in 2022. I think he tried to blame the invasion of Crimea in 2014 on Ukrainians, or possibly on the EU, actually, given that it was pre-Brexit. I put a few quid on that, even though I'm not certain that I'm right. And then the terminally online, like the woman I bumped into infamously when I was doing jury service, who truly believed that all of the aid being sent to Ukraine was being spent on luxury yachts by Volodymyr Zelenskyy, or that she also believed, of course, that Michelle Obama is actually in reality a man, but that is a consequence of what we were talking to Elliot Higgins about yesterday. I don't know that the Queen's death fits into that category, because a lot of Republicans took the opportunity to air their grievances about the existence of the monarchy in the general. Hating Liz Truss, Fabio suggests. That's pretty good. Adolescence, the TV show, that felt like the country was speaking as one. Everyone apart from Kemi Badenoch, Joe says, was in agreement about that. But I think Chris is currently winning. He points out the last time the country truly spoke as one was when Deirdre Barlow was unfairly imprisoned, was wrongfully imprisoned. 6 minutes after 10 is the time. So I mentioned that, and I'll quote one UK political figure. Who do you think this was? Who do you think said this not long ago? I simply cannot believe that Trump will ditch the Ukrainians. On the contrary, having worked out, as he surely has, that there is no deal to be done with Putin, I reckon there is a good chance that he will double down and finish what he started by giving them what they need to win. Which international statesperson of extraordinary sagaciousness and insight? Is it sagaciousness or sagacity, Keith? I always forget. Yes, is his answer. It is definitely sagaciousness or sagacity. Which international statesman do you think came up with that comment just a few short months ago? I simply cannot believe that Trump will ditch the Ukraine. Do you want a clue? Do you want a clue? Somebody who is paid about £500,000 a year for their insights into international politics. I simply cannot believe that Trump will ditch the Ukrainians. On the contrary, having worked out, as he surely has, that there is no deal to be done with Putin, I reckon there is a good chance that he will double down and finish what he started. These are, and it is not Daniel Hannan, these are Daniel Hannan levels of wrongness. Daniel Hannan's crown as the wrongest man in the world, under threat now from the man who put him in the House of Lords, because it was, perhaps inevitably, Boris Johnson who spoke those words. Boris Johnson, who's sycophantic. And he's done a U-turn on Trump, remember? He used to make jokes about how unpleasant it would be to bump into him. He attacked him, his intellect and his integrity, when he was telling lies about no-go zones in London. But, there he is. Earlier this year or late last year, opining that Trump would never ditch the Ukrainians. In fact, he would end up arming them to such a degree that they would be able to defeat Russia. 8 minutes after 10 is the time. And now it appears to be over. As we touched upon yesterday, the inability of good journalists, good analysts, good commentators to recognise the sheer reversal of the natural order, the utter abandonment of everything that we've known in the post-war period, continues to infect a lot of the coverage. There's still a sort of will he, won't he. There's still a sort of, maybe there's a secret master plan. Maybe he's playing 4D chess. Maybe he knows what he's doing. And of course, what we have established together, and I still fall down the trap. I need you to pull me out of it most mornings when we discuss matters Ukrainian. You pull me out of the hole because I start wondering whether there is actually something else going on other than the insatiable narcissistic ego of Donald Trump riding roughshod over everything that we in the West have held dear now for generations. Yesterday, he attacked Zelenskyy again. He did a thing that I think we have said he would do, inevitably, which is when he failed to deliver the deal that he promised, he would blame it on Ukraine. And of course, if Ukraine had agreed to a deal that was effectively demanding that they hand over everything to Vladimir Putin that Vladimir Putin wants, had he actually successfully extorted and bullied Ukraine into accepting that settlement, two things could be said with certainty. Vladimir Putin would ignore it at some not too distant point in the future and send troops back into Ukraine, and Donald Trump would claim to some fanfare among his supporters that he'd pulled off some sort of diplomatic coup. So if someone stole your house, let's just say someone moved into your upstairs, the upstairs in your home. I fully appreciate some people don't have an upstairs, but stop splitting hairs. Someone just moved in. You came home one day from work and you opened your front door and you sat down in the kitchen, you put the kettle on, you made yourself a cup of tea, and you thought, hang on a minute, that's a bit strange. There's someone upstairs. So you go to the bottom of the stairs, you go, hello? Hello? Is there anybody up there? And someone shouts down the stairs. I think it would be inappropriate of me to do a Russian accent at this point, but somebody shouts down the stairs, this is my home now, leave me alone. So what do? You phone the police, you go to the authorities, you appeal to the law. And imagine they turned around and said, it's absolutely fine, we've settled this problem, the people upstairs are going to stay there, and you're going to live downstairs now. Actually, let's say that you phoned Donald Trump. Donald Trump appointed himself a deliverer of a peace deal in your home. I will, on the first day of my presidency, sort out the argument about the people living upstairs in the house that you own. And then nearly 4 months later, he announces he's come to a brilliant deal and they're going to stay upstairs and you are going to suck it up. And when you say, no, I'm not, he says, I can't believe these ungrateful plebs in the downstairs are dismissing and refusing to sign up to my beautiful, beautiful peace deal. In fact, they are harming the negotiations and making inflammatory comments about my wonderful, wonderful peace deal. This after Kyiv said it would not accept Russian sovereignty over Crimea. Trump said that you, downstairs, had no cards to play after he abruptly withdrew his negotiators from talks in your house about whether or not these thieving, genocidal interlopers upstairs, I should probably have added that they've started killing people in your spare bedroom, but they're going to stay there, and that's the peace deal that Donald Trump has put together. What happens next is a question that I'm tempted to ask you almost every day. And listen, I talk about Israel and Gaza a lot, so spare me the text saying, okay, now do Israel and Gaza. When I'm talking about Israel and Gaza, we don't talk about Ukraine and Russia. And when we talk about Ukraine and Russia, we don't talk about Israel and Gaza, except to acknowledge many similarities in the treatment of the Palestinian people and the Ukrainian people, up to and including alleged war crimes. But please don't be an idiot and think that you have to talk about something else every single time you talk about something else. Because today it would be an enormous insult to the Ukrainian people not to talk exclusively about the Ukrainian issue. An enormous insult. Just as it would be an insult to the Palestinian people if you were telling me to start talking about the Ukrainians whenever we were addressing the plight of Palestinian people. It's not often I allow my irritation at the kind of undergraduate, two-dimensional, self-appointed geniuses to bubble to the surface, but today I'm prepared to make an exception. Sit down and be quiet. The question today is about American abandonment of Ukraine. The question today is about what happens, what the rest of the world should do, and what the rest of the world can do. And I don't know the answers to those questions, and I'm not sure that Keir Starmer does. He's been boxed into a very uncomfortable situation. I think someone's just rung in and said, what about the Falklands? There's a level of whataboutery that makes my ears want to shrivel up and drop off. Honestly, it's. I don't know what's happened in the last few months, but the first 10 minutes, my inbox is full of the stupidest people imaginable. It's only when I get to about the 10:15 junction, it's as if my audience only arrives at 10 o'clock, and I'm left with this weird hangover of absolute bone-crunching idiocy that I have to wade through for the first 12 minutes of the programme. I'm sure I'm imagining things. I don't know what Keir Starmer is going to do after he has pointed out that any peace in Ukraine is going to be contingent upon a US security backstop. In the absence of a US security backstop, what is left? In the absence of US support for Ukraine, do we even know what is left? 0345 6060 973. What will the West do? I wonder how naive it sounds to you when I say there is no earthly way Zelenskyy can ever stop fighting. There is no earthly way Zelenskyy can ever accept a peace deal that doesn't at least recognize the historical or the most recent historical Ukrainian borders. If Zelenskyy rolls over, if he is compelled to roll over by an absence of international support, the message sent to the Ukraine, the message sent to the Kremlin, is that you can do whatever you want. The failure to understand this seems to me to be either willful or spectacular or both. You tell Vladimir Putin that his tactics have worked. You send a message to the Kremlin that says, you keep Ukraine, you carry on. Ukraine will suck it up. Ukraine's refusal to accept your theft of their land is a Ukraine problem, not a Kremlin problem. The ignorance of the last 100 years of history that you need to think for a nanosecond that this is about anything other than Trump respecting a fellow despot as opposed to having any interest at all in the welfare of Ukrainian people. Absolutely extraordinary, because it ignores the existence of Lithuania, it ignores the existence of Estonia, it ignores the existence of all the former Soviet states upon which Vladimir Putin still has designs. It ignores the genocidal imperial ambition of a psychopath in the Kremlin. And I don't know whether Western leaders have got the wherewithal to stand up to it. I don't know whether they've got the support to stand up to it. I don't know whether there is a will, an appetite to properly support Ukraine. And crucially, I don't know what it looks like in the absence of United States support. So I'm going to ask you, what does it mean? What does Donald Trump's withdrawal complete about? I'm going to go further. The United States of America is now an ally of Vladimir Putin's Russia. They've dangled little carrots in front of him so successfully that he's now got designs upon rare earth materials in parts of the former Soviet Union. He wants what they call in America aluminum, and Vladimir Putin has promised to give it to him. I can envision in the not too distant future an abandoned Ukraine relying almost exclusively upon European support and its own stout lion hearts, while Russia signs deals with Donald Trump's United States of America designed to enrich both of them. The days of sanctions bringing oligarchs to their knees, the hopes of Putin being toppled by internal pressure brought about by financial penalties being inflicted upon his cronies who have robbed their own country blind are completely over. I haven't spoken to my friend Bill Browder about this yet, but those rapidly growing hopes that sanctions upon oligarchs were going to achieve the unthinkable and actually get the monstrous man out of the Kremlin, those are now disappearing over the horizon with every utterance from the Oval Office. The United States of America is an ally of Russia. What does that mean? Most obviously for Ukraine in the short term, but in the long term, perhaps for the whole world. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. There is no more important story in the world today. There is no more important issue than the idea of a Western alliance. A Western alliance standing up to Russian imperial ambition. There never has been, not since the end of the Second World War, or at least not since the fall of the Berlin Wall. And yet, in the absence of the United States of America, everything that we thought we knew no longer applies. What does this mean? What does an alliance between Putin and Trump mean for Ukraine, for the world, and for, Keir Starmer, or, if you prefer, sort of Western political leaders? Is it there, do you think? Remember that 1939 is not that long ago. The idea of European allies joining forces to repel a European enemy without any American involvement at all until Pearl Harbor. It shouldn't feel unthinkable, should it? This is one of the silver linings to what's happened, is that the necessity of Europe cutting itself off from the umbilical of US aid is now real and present. But how mad would it be to suggest that Europe and Ukraine could go it alone? 0345 6060 973. Please prove my theory right, that all the clever callers start piling in at about 10:15, because that's where we are now. Well, actually, 20 past to be precise.
James O'Brien on LBC.
21 minutes after 10, and Chris reminds me that we should also be wondering what this means for the USA. Crikey, I don't want to sound trivial, but the canon of post-war literature and cinema are all cast Russia as the sworn enemy of the United States of America. Think back to the Rocky films if you want proof of it. I suppose latterly you got posh English people or people from the Middle East becoming the main enemies, but they were individuals rather than states. Hunt for Red October. What does it mean for the United States to be now essentially an ally of Vladimir Putin's Russia? Let's start with James, who's in Worcester. James, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Morning, James.
Cliche.
God, what an echo chamber. People have sometimes claimed this show is an echo chamber. Today, they've got the most conclusive proof. Morning, James.
Well, I'm even in Worcester, so a spit from your old neck of the woods.
Unbelievable.
I just want to say that I really want the European leaders, including our own leader, to stop living in this blissful ignorance that they're in at the moment and sort of come to reality and realise that this isn't going to work out well for them. Trump isn't going to suddenly wake up in the morning and say, do you know what, it was all a bluff.
No,
I'm not really a maniac.
It's the art of the deal. He's transactional. Don't worry about what he says. Worry about what he does. Some of those people are boneheaded, but some well-meaning and experienced people have fallen into the normality bias of thinking that the old tools still work.
But how long can the likes of Starmer and Macron sort of carry on thinking this isn't sort of what it looks like? We don't need to start building bullet factories tomorrow. Everything's going to be okay. I don't know how long they can live like, because I think the world's in a state of peril. I think, I don't follow politics massively and sort of try to not follow Trump too much. But I think the world is in a real sort of state of danger, and I don't think the risk can be overstated, to be honest.
And a few people picking up on things I've missed, which I always enjoy. It makes sense, of course, this alliance that I'm positing between the White House and the Kremlin. It makes sense of J.D. Vance's attacks on Europe. And it actually removes any sense of hyperbole from your use of the word peril, because J.D. Vance has made it clear that Europe is his enemy. Vladimir Putin wants nothing more than a further destabilised Europe. The best way to achieve that is to foster and seed the increasing sort of far-right political successes. But on the ground, give Putin Ukraine, give him Crimea without any quibble, without any caveat, and the idea that he doesn't then help himself to something else.
Well, it's not him then.
No.
It's China and America. I think they're all going to. Fiona Hill's on Sky News today.
Yes, I saw.
Saying that Trump, Putin, and Xi all think the same way, and the world needs to be divided up across those three superpowers.
That's what he wants.
The UK needs to be subservient to either Russia, the US, or China, in their view. I
naively cross my fingers and hope that the European Union could be a player on that stage, if indeed that is the future that is all we have to look forward to. But of course, militarily, it isn't yet. It can't be, but it could be one day. It makes you wonder why a politician in this country who cannot disguise his admiration of Vladimir Putin would also have a problem with the idea of a European army. But perhaps that's a question for another day. I love the way James says he doesn't really follow politics, but he just drops casual Fiona Hill quotes into his own commentary. She's brilliant. She was Donald Trump's advisor on matters Russian, by the way, during the first administration, but she subsequently in the second administration had her security clearances revoked for committing the most cardinal crime that you can commit in Donald Trump's circle: understanding things and telling the truth. Imi Saluwa is in Fulham. Imi Saluwa, what would you like to say?
Morning, James. How
Hello.
are you?
Very well. How are you? How lovely to hear from you.
Oh, that's good. I don't normally call you about things like this because I don't know if this is my area of expertise, but we'll give it a go.
I tell you what, it's not Donald Trump's, so don't worry about it.
So do you remember, was it last week or a couple of weeks ago, you had the phone in about Ursula von der Leyen saying
Yes.
that the West as we know it is dead?
Yes.
So I think this is really just a continuation of that. I think, unfortunately for us, Europe has had this whole kind of thing of, you know what, we're so post-war. The last big war that we had ended in 1945. We just don't need to invest in our military the way that the US has. We can rely on them. It's fine. We're in a new world order where actually things aren't really going to change. But I think what we're seeing is we can't rely on the US. The US as we know it is dead. We kind of have to go back to almost like pre-World War II thinking, where it was literally like, we are on our own. If the US choose to get involved, they choose to get involved. If they don't, they don't. And I think it's uncomfortable for us. But even when Keir Starmer wanted to up defence spending, everybody's up in arms. But I don't know how much choice we have.
Yes.
I don't see what the alternative is. I mean, Russian imperialism, nobody wants that. But I think our society has been so conditioned to think that, you know, peace is the best way forward, and, you know, all these nuclear deterrents, do we really need them? And this military, do we really need it? But actually, we've forgotten the reality in the world that we live.
And it's time to redraw the world. I mean, it is time for Europe to recognise the reality you describe. The problem is these sound long-term, don't they? These sound like kind of a big game of Risk that's playing out over weeks, months and years. For the people of Ukraine, this is urgent. This is sort of 24-hour stuff. What happens if, as seems almost inevitable, Donald Trump completely abandons Ukraine?
But I also don't know if that's kind of a lack of foresight on Europe's part. I think if you'd gone back to pre the election and you'd heard the rhetoric coming out of the US, and you'd seen that actually Donald Trump was probably likely to be president, Europe should have been planning.
But the stupidest people in Europe, and indeed in America, well, stupidest is unfair. Some of them are incredibly stupid. Some of them are morally bankrupt, and some of them are just well-meaning addicts to normality bias. They kept telling us not to worry about what he said, just to worry about what he did. I remember sitting here and screaming metaphorically about how he keeps doing what he said he would do. When do we stop being told to not worry about what he says and only worry about what he does? It's incredible. Boris Johnson, who I quoted at the top of the show, constantly talking about rhetoric not being the same as action. And here we are, staring at the action born of the rhetoric.
But I think sometimes people don't want to recognise what's right in front of their face. I remember watching one of the debates and thinking, am I living the Twilight Zone?
Yeah.
Something happened.
Welcome to my world.
Yeah, he was so clearly going to do it. And it was, like you always said, it was always going to be worse than before because the guardrails have gone. The smart people have gone. The people who would have moderated him a bit have gone. So it is just him and sycophants. I've never seen such sycophancy. And I studied politics back in the, how about 17 law? That was a long time ago. But I've always been, and I've never, ever since I really started getting interested in politics, seen sycophancy like this.
Well, I know, but maybe not modern politics. But actually, I don't know why I found myself thinking increasingly about Henry VIII at the turn of the year, and actually understanding how Henry VIII managed to achieve the things that he achieved becomes a lot easier when you see a sort of latter-day tyrant flexing his muscles in your world. So, you know, if it's Mao Zedong or Joseph Stalin, Vladimir Putin, or I don't know, what's the Colonel Gaddafi, it doesn't feel like it's in your world. But, you know, the transatlantic friendship, the special relationship, this is happening in our world. Henry VIII was in our world. You sort of think about the equivalent in Tudor times of what we've seen since January. I always think about the dissolution of the monasteries. Don't laugh at me. Imi Saluwa, thank you. Don't laugh at me, because the dissolution of the monasteries involves a sycophant sitting at a table with the king, knowing two things. Knowing that he could have his own head chopped off at any time, Such is the tyrannical grip upon the court, upon the population, upon the country. And the second thing is the only way he can avoid having his head chopped off at some point in the very near future is to help the king get loads of money. So do you know what he said? Do you know what the sycophant turned around and said? And unlike Trump, of course, Henry VIII had very clever sycophants surrounding him. He said, why don't we take all the money off the monks? Why don't we just go and strip out all the monasteries? Why don't we go and help ourselves to all the riches that are tied up in churches and monasteries and convents around the... I mean, what an incredible moment that must have been. To sit there and think the unthinkable, to say the unsayable, and to see the monarch nod. Why don't we abandon Ukraine? Why don't we completely ignore the entire post-war period? Why don't we tear up our NATO commitments? Why don't we actually make cozy with the psychopathic genocidal killer in the Kremlin and abandon the heroes of Ukraine, abandon our Western allies? Denmark, per capita, more people died in Afghanistan after the US triggered NATO alliances to go into Afghanistan. More Danish soldiers died per capita than American soldiers. Yeah, why don't we announce we're going to steal Greenland from our allies? It's not unprecedented. We just didn't think it would happen in our time and in our world. It's 10:31. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
33 minutes after 10. Donald Trump attacks Volodymyr Zelenskyy again. Vladimir Putin attacks Kyiv again. At least 9 people dead. Another putative war crime. Certainly yesterday's apparent targeting of a bus containing civilians fits almost all of the criteria for war crimes. This, of course, is a point at which it's pertinent to mention Israel's conduct in Gaza and the carte blanche that Donald Trump and other administrations have given to Israel to break international law, most obviously in the West Bank and quite probably during the conflict in Gaza, the arrest warrants that have been issued, speak to a world where nothing matters anymore. International law has no bite. And that's the world Trump wants to inhabit. It's the world that Vladimir Putin already inhabits. He, of course, is also wanted by the International Criminal Court, like he cares. What are the odds? All right, don't think I've gone completely doolally. What are the odds on Putin visiting the States during this presidential term? By rights, he should be arrested if he does. But America isn't a signatory to the International Criminal Court. Benjamin Netanyahu has an arrest warrant out for him. He's visited Donald Trump already. What are the odds? Because let me run you through that little opening again. Donald Trump attacks Volodymyr Zelenskyy again. Vladimir Putin kills Ukrainians in Kyiv again. This morning, at least 9 dead, many more injured, as you just heard in the bulletin. So who's the enemy here and who's the ally? Who attacked Ukrainians yesterday? Rhetorically or militarily? Who attacked Ukrainians yesterday? Rhetorically or militarily? Answer, Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. The United States and Russia. How does an American handle this? How do you process this if you are a normal, patriotic American? You are on the same team as the Russians now. Your country is on the same side as the Russians when it comes to the war in Ukraine. Let me run you through. I'll be with Paul and Stephen imminently, but I really feel that the information is so important at the moment. This is considered to be the final offer that was made to Ukraine, okay? This is the thing that Zelenskyy has said he couldn't possibly countenance, and that is what prompted the rhetorical attack, the oratorical attack upon Zelenskyy from Donald Trump, while his ally Vladimir Putin took control of the actual lethal military attacks. Russia would get, or US would recognize Russian sovereignty over Crimea. The front lines would be frozen, where they are now, more or less, meaning Russia would get control of occupied parts of Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and the one that's really hard to pronounce, Zaporozhye. Ukraine would agree never to join NATO, but could at some point in the future become an EU member. And suddenly the determination of people like Farage to ensure that there was no EU army begins, when you see it through the lens of support for Vladimir Putin's aims in the world, begins to make sense. The post-24 sanctions on Russia would be eased, so the punishments for everything they've done would be removed. The oligarchs would be free once again to spend their stolen money in New York, Washington, and possibly London. And this is the bit that's crazy. This is the thing that Ukraine should agree to in a peace deal. economic cooperation between Russia and the US. So not just a lifting of sanctions, but an opening of new trade routes, new trade lines. We can be even greater friends. Ukraine has to agree that the United States and Russia will be free to further enrich each other. In return, they get a, quote, robust security guarantee from countries other than the United States. Russia will withdraw from a relatively tiny parcel of land it currently holds in Kharkiv. Navigation up a crucial river and unspecified compensation. So bearing in mind that Donald Trump keeps claiming that Ukraine owe him money, quite what compensation would look like in reality is anybody's guess. And then that place that's very hard to pronounce, Zaporizhzhia, the nuclear power plant there would become Ukrainian in terms of sovereignty, but wait for it, it would be run by the US, and all the electricity it produces would be shared between Russia and Ukraine. I got told off earlier, politely, for calling it a peace deal. I mean, you're absolutely right. It's no more a peace deal than the Great Hunger in Ireland was a famine. It's not a peace deal at all. I don't know what word you would use to describe it. It's an extortion. It's an aberration. It's abhorrent. It's disgusting. And it's something that you would never have conceived possible 2 years ago when Western leaders from Boris Johnson to Emmanuel Macron were queuing up to talk about how essential, and Joe Biden, how essential it was to support Ukraine. Zaporizhzhia. Thank you, Robert. Paul's in Glasgow. Paul, what would you like to say?
You were asking, James, about what this would mean. It would be an absolute unmitigated disaster if the Ukrainians were to accept the deal that the Americans and the Russians are putting to them. Because every time Vladimir Putin is a psychopath, and he's been proven ultimately every day of his life to be a habitual liar. He walks all over. He was in Crimea, Georgia, Chechnya. He was in Syria. The Russians were in Afghanistan. And I think we're giving Vladimir Putin a wee bit too much on the PR propaganda platform, because his economy is the size of the Italian economy. Yeah. The combined economies of the Europeans and the United Kingdom and the countries in the southern hemisphere of Australia and New Zealand, where democracies flourish. If we were to say we will accept this deal, and by the way, I actually think that Donald Trump is a psychopath as well as the other despots who are trying to carve up the world. And I put Mr. Z in that category. I put the guy in North Korea in that category. The people who are running Iran in that category. The people who are trying to carve up the world. So if we blink, which we cannot do, the world as it stands in the next 50 years will be torn apart. And the simple reason is there's a bigger problem than Vladimir Putin, and it's China. So if we agree to this peace garbage being accepted by the Ukrainian people, and I implore them for being as brave as they are and fighting for what they believe in, which is good over evil. If we allow the Russians to stamp all over Europe and have a proxy war against the United Kingdom, where they're cyber attacking us all the time, they're cutting cables under the sea, they're just attacking us on all fronts, covert warfare.
Well, they're sending agents here to murder British citizens.
Absolutely, but the main point, James, I want to make here is the Ukrainians have decided to die on their feet than to live forever on their knees. That's an old saying that I read somewhere one time. But if we, the Europeans, the good people, who I'm pleased to say there's more good people in the world than the bad people, if we allow this to happen, this is where it goes toxic. China will say, oh, that's okay for them. Well, we'll take Taiwan.
Yes, they will. I don't know that the Chinese. I don't know enough about sort of that part of the world, what their ambitions are beyond Taiwan. I don't know that they pose the same threat to the world order that an empowered Putin would do. But your model of the carve-up is correct. I don't think North Korea and Iran fit the analysis properly because they don't have the heft or the power. They might have the ambition to be massive players on this. It's about round 12 of a game of Risk, one texter has suggested to me, when there are 3 or 4 players left and they start mopping up everything else. And North Korea and Iran are never going to be like that. Donald Trump wants to be. Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping are. And that leaves so much in the hands of European leaders. What do you think, Paul, the equivalent of Germany invading Poland in 1939 would be? Because you used the word garbage to describe this so-called proposal. An awful lot of people have texted me the word appeasement, which I think is a politer word, although they both pretty much do the job. Garbage, appeasement. Some people have called it a ransom note. Other people have called it a carve-up. I mean, let's go for appeasement. It's a massive act. It's ordering Zelenskyy to appease Putin, and Zelenskyy refuses, and Trump attacks him. But for the entire, for the parts of the world that matter to consolidate behind Ukraine and against Putin, what would be the equivalent of the 1939 invasion of Poland? What do you think Putin would have to do for the ghost of Winston Churchill to be revivified and remind modern world leaders what courage and what freedom look like?
If Zelenskyy was to accept this, James, it's unthinkable.
Yeah, but what's the pivot point where everybody sees clearly that Putin has to be resisted and fought against? Because we're not there yet.
I don't know the answer to that question.
No, I don't either. I mean, there'll be Lithuanian people listening who think it might be them, Estonians, Polish people. You know, the carve-up, was it the Czech carve-up that one caller told us about? They carved it up and gave it to Hitler, despite the fact that the people there didn't want it. That's what Donald Trump is trying to do here, but they got away with it in the 1930s. It wasn't Sudetenland that broke it. What was that great line our caller used when she said it was about us but not with us, or something like that? It was pithier than that. I don't know, but other than that, your analysis for my money is absolutely spot on. The obvious answer to the question is the same. It would be Poland again. I tell you, the clever people who really know what they're talking about do not rule that out. It sounds unthinkable, unbelievable to our 21st century sensibilities, but they do not rule it out. Lithuania and Kaliningrad being joined. Emma makes a literary point about Oceania, Eurasia and East Asia, but as we've established many times on this programme, Orwell was something of a prophet. The invasion of Finland, Latvia, all of these places. And there is no analysis of Vladimir Putin available anywhere on earth that doesn't recognise his ambitions in those departments. And what this so-called deal, this proposal cobbled together by Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin's key cronies, what it does is feed those ambitions and try to put the blame on Zelenskyy. This is such a moment. This is such an epic, epochal moment. And I just wonder whether Western leaders who, at the moment, certainly some members of our political class seem to be more concerned with gender-neutral toilets than they are with the possible redrawing of the entire post-war world order. But here we are.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Strong on seriousness today and not so much psychology, but quite often when we find ourselves talking about geopolitics at the moment, we look on psychology. We've used the word psychopath a lot, but I think Donald Trump hates Volodymyr Zelenskyy. I think he hates Volodymyr Zelenskyy because Zelenskyy holds up a mirror. As we've talked about a few times on the programme, bigots hate nobody more than the mirror holders. The people that hold up mirrors and show you who you are. Zelensky's courage, Zelensky's clarity, his moral probity holds up a mirror in which Trump can't hide from his own depravity. And most of the time he doesn't care. He's not haunted by his depravity every minute of every day. But when he's reminded of what he truly is, the mask slips, doesn't it? He looks across to the Kremlin and he sees someone who is more depraved than him, and he loves it. He feels a mixture of envy and fear. He looks at Zelenskyy and he sees someone who refuses to bend the knee to him, which he can't abide, he can't cope with, he can't deal with, but also displays attributes that throughout the history of humanity have proven to be the most valued, and he knows he doesn't have any of them. The post last night about Zelenskyy possibly proves the point. He writes that Volodymyr Zelenskyy is boasting on the front page of the Wall Street Journal that Ukraine will not legally recognize the occupation of Crimea. Boasting. So remember those people who've just stolen the upstairs story of your house? Would you please stop boasting about how you're not going to recognize their right to stay there? Incredible verb to use, and then tries to blame it on Barack Obama, the moonlight, the sunshine and the boogie, taking no responsibility whatsoever for his own complete abandonment of Ukraine. Lee is in Lviv in Ukraine. Lee, what would you like to say? How are you, mate?
Hello, James. I'm okay. A little flustered today. I've completely forgotten what I was going to say to you. My head is all over the place.
Well, do you want to take a moment?
Yeah, I'm okay. I'll just.
Right.
If I take a moment, I'm a great waffler, James. If you let me go,
well, we're in good company.
Have trouble shutting me up.
You're in good company. Keith can keep tabs on both of us, but it's good to hear your voice, and you are, no doubt, still working in the area of military rehabilitation on the ground in Ukraine.
Yes, that's right. That's right. I've just spent the morning with the people who this affects the most, and people who have paid the highest price for what's been happening since 2014, or since whenever, people who've lost limbs, who've suffered incredible trauma, who've lost their homes, their families, children. One guy this morning had been a prisoner of war in Russian captivity, suffered horrendous torture, psychological scarring. And that, I guess, kind of leads me into one of the things I wanted to say. One of the million things I wanted to say is I have a friend in London, Alisa Kromachuk, who's the director of the Ukrainian Institute in London. She'd make a wonderful guest on the show, actually. She's written a book called The Death of a Soldier, as told by his sister. Her brother was killed pre-22 in the fighting in Luhansk, so post-2014, which is a reminder to Donald Trump that Ukraine has been fighting since 2014. Yes. This wasn't started by Zelenskyy. And despite what he said in that awful tweet last night, or Truth Social post, Ukraine has been fighting since then. It's not something that they just decided to start doing now. And she has a phrase that she often delivers at talks and lectures, which is, there can be no peace without justice. And for me, that's such an important phrase, because I really want people to understand how it feels to be here for Ukrainians, or any Ukrainians anywhere, because justice isn't just some legal document or abstract thing that happens in The Hague. It's a feeling, it's an emotion. You can possibly hear it in my voice now. It's an emotion that when harm has been done to you, when someone has done something to you, something terrible, that in order for there to be peace, emotional peace, a peace in our hearts and minds, we need to feel like, and it sounds an awful thing to say, that the culprit has at least paid a price. That if there's to be peace, they have not suffered in some way, but there has been some form of reparation. And this, I don't even want to call it a peace deal. It's the United States surrendering on behalf
Just call
of
it a proposal or an appeasement. Whatever you prefer, but it's not a peace deal. Yeah. It's also an obnoxious phrase to use, and it's my fault for using it. I should never have let the words pass my lips, because it won't be a peace deal. You think Vladimir Putin's going to go, oh crikey, that's my knuckles wrapped. I certainly won't be making any more illegal incursions into sovereign territories anytime soon. That's absolutely pie in the sky.
Exactly, and it feels like it's an open invitation for him to do it again, and not just for him to do it again, but for other despots around the world to do it again.
Well, it gives Trump
has effectively said, fill your boots. In fact, fill your boots, and as long as you cut us in, we're all good.
That's exactly what they've done. It's not even a figure of speech or an exaggeration. That line in the proposal that Axios, the news website, has reported that they've seen the one-page final offer, and the line about economic cooperation between Russia and the US on energy and industry being one of the conditions that Ukraine has to agree to. That is literally, in technical terms, what you have just described. How do and I don't imagine it's the major topic of conversation when you're busy actually trying to help people cope with their injuries. But how are Ukrainian people in general processing? Is it public opinion that the US, that Donald Trump is abandoning them? Would you hear people in Ukraine at the moment arguing or suggesting or explaining that Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump are now allies, and Zelenskyy is the one that's been cast out into the cold by both of them.
Very much so. That sense is very much pervasive. It's everywhere. There's a where I often go for a coffee is the Art Students Cafe at the Art University around the corner. If you walk in there, on the board, you've got the list of coffees.
Yeah.
Americano has been crossed out.
Wow. Oh, wow.
Obviously, these are our students. They're students. They're rebellious. They have a sense of what's going on. Obviously, they might find the odd exception, but by and large, that this is very much the sense. And it does touch on something else, actually, just on that awful piece, this proposal that has been put forward. It also demonstrates such an abject lack of understanding of history and of current events and current affairs. And one of the many points that comes out for me is, one of the great ironies is the MAGA crowd, Trump, Vance, they've liked to push this propaganda, this Kremlin propaganda line that Zelenskyy is somehow some form of dictator. And here's the great irony, precisely because he's not the thing that they say he is, it makes this peace proposal worthless. Because if you take, for example, things like the recognition of Crimea as Russia, it's Zelenskyy that won't do this, he's causing problems. Zelenskyy cannot do this because he's not a dictator. He has to put this before the Ukrainian parliament, and the Ukrainian constitution will have to be rewritten. Zelenskyy can't accept this deal. It has to be accepted by the Ukrainian people, and possibly, I may be wrong, someone would need to correct me, possibly by even a series of referenda. So the man just can't sign away huge tracts of Ukrainian territory or sign these deals precisely because he isn't the dictator that they claim he is.
I hadn't clocked that, but of course you make perfect sense, and God save us all from referendums. I guess the bit missing from what you said is just even if he wanted to, because he clearly doesn't, but even if he did, he couldn't because of the constitutional requirements that you have outlined.
It's the same as to think about martial law. I think about 2 weeks ago we had the most recent vote on martial law. Zelenskyy doesn't impose martial law that prevents elections. It's imposed by the Ukrainian parliament. And last time, I think the numbers were 360 to 1, 360 for the imposition of martial law, 1 against. And those 360 votes for are made up of even some pro-Russian candidates, even some opposition parties, some people who absolutely detest Zelenskyy, people who stood against him in previous elections joking that the guy's just a comedian, are voting for the imposition of martial law. This is not something that Zelenskyy can just arbitrarily sign away, precisely because he's not the dictator that the Russians, ergo, then Trump and Vance claim he is.
That's such a brilliant point. And it also explains why they use the rhetorical dishonesty of claiming that he doesn't want elections and he won't have elections. It is that mad historical paradigm of accusing them of what you actually are, accusing Zelenskyy of being what Putin actually is, but Zelenskyy demonstrably isn't. Could you imagine if Putin was subject to actual proper democracy? It would be the world would be an entirely different place. Never mind Russia, but there they are accusing Zelenskyy of all the things that they're guilty of themselves. And I hesitate to ask this question, Lee, but what is the big hope where you are at the moment? What is? If you could somehow coalesce public feeling, whether it's the members of parliament that you've just described, or the broader population, or the people that you have personal interactions with, what's the big hope? What would be the thing that they mention in their prayers? As in something that could actually happen, as opposed to a divine intervention?
It's such a difficult one to answer, James, because it's such a broad spectrum of people, and it's such a big country with people with different interests, different areas.
But if we were to see the continuing resistance and putative defeat of Putin, it has to be a sort of vague assembly of European action and intervention, doesn't it? That's their only hope.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think it comes back to sort of what I sort of started with, is it has to come back to there has to be some sense of justice. Some sense that Russia hasn't just won here and been handed a victory.
And that's why this appeasement deal is so obnoxious, because it does precisely the opposite of deliver justice to the Ukrainian people.
And also, this sense of security guarantees has to be there, because otherwise, as so many Ukrainians have said, Kira Radic, who often appears on British British TV and radio, Kira often says, we're fighting this war so that our children don't have to. And as much as they want the killing to stop now, if it means they have to keep fighting so that their children aren't fighting this war in 5-10 years' time, then that's where they are. So any deal has to have cast iron security guarantees whoever that comes from, whoever delivers that. But clearly the American word is worthless.
Yeah, and it's worth mentioning that Kira is a leader of one of the opposition parties that you mentioned, and yet on all of these issues, foursquare behind Volodymyr Zelenskyy. If people want to find out a little more about the work that you're doing at the moment, Lee, in Ukraine, in Lviv, what can they do?
Thank you, James. It's very kind. We're on X as Fierce Calm, and we're on. We have a website as Fierce Calm. That's fierce as in angry, and calm as in calm. You can find us there on our website or on social media, on Instagram as well, and you can see the work that we do with Ukrainian veterans, amputees, and children.
And I think I say this to you, not if not every time that we speak, but certainly I try to. You are looking after yourself as well, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
Because this is traumatic territory that you're in.
It's one of the things I teach other people, and I know we're often the very worst at looking after ourselves, but I am taking care of myself, and I have to say it's an absolute privilege to serve the people of Ukraine, because they are the most phenomenal people, and every day I'm just astounded by their resilience and their courage.
Thank you, Lee. Take care.
Thanks, James.
And we will speak again of that, I'm certain. It's 11 o'clock.
James O'Brien on LBC.
3 minutes after 11. A lot of love for Lee coming in, as you would expect. And nice to ask, I think, about being sure that he's looking after himself, because that is very much his world, and he knows the importance of it. But sometimes when I ask people questions like that, I'm trying to remind you, and I've had a little look at his social media account on the platform that shall not be named. And he's keeping his sense of humour in those circumstances as well. So he has a colleague called Yulia, and when he arrived most recently in Lviv, he brought with him some Walker's crisps, including prawn cocktail flavour crisps. And he's posted a little account of the dialogue that he had with his Ukrainian colleague. So Yulia says, "Why you have suitcase full of chips and you have cocktail made of fish?" To which Lee replies, "It's for the English patient at Superhumans." That's the rehab centre where he does a lot of his work. And Yulia then asks, "And you bring him chips that taste of crazy British fish cocktails?" And Lee replies, "He asked for them." And Yulia responds, "He is sick. It must be the drugs." I love the idea of I wonder what the equivalent is. Probably the way we talk about frogs' legs. Prawn cocktail crisps in the eyes of somebody who's never had the distinct pleasure of tasting them must sound like the strangest thing on earth. And another reason why I found Lee's call powerful is because you've heard me talk a lot about Lily Pullman over the years. Lily was the Holocaust survivor who became a good friend of mine towards the end of her life. We lost her during lockdown, and she was, of course, a guest on Full Disclosure when we did it live from the stage. One of the most magical nights of my life, I have to tell you. But at the outbreak of the Second World War, Lvov, or Lviv, L-V-I-V, where Lee was calling from in Ukraine, was actually in Poland. And it was in Lvov that Lily hid in the attic of a Nazi, a woman who was working for the occupying forces and therefore was by definition a Nazi, although not by ideology. And she hid Lily and her mum in that attic for the best part of the Second World War. So whenever I see that town on the screen, I think of the inspirational Holocaust survivor who dedicated her life to agitating for peace, and who died in 2021 before this invasion, before Lviv found itself in the firing line once again. 6 minutes after 11 is the time. A complete change of pace now, but not necessarily a change of energy. There are a couple of stories around today that speak to similar issues. And I think they're both a bit bonkers, if you'll allow me to use that word. The first is, in the sense of unlikely to be possible to achieve, but quite attractive at first glance. The first involves the digital secretary, Peter Kyle, telling one newspaper that he's considering the online equivalent of a TV watershed for children. How on earth that would work, goodness only knows. But it's one way of addressing the addictive nature of social media, which is definitively disrupting their sleep, children's families, other aspects of their lives. So TikTok is apparently introducing 10 p.m. curfews for under 16s. And maybe I'm falling into the trap of thinking you can't get the genie back in the bottle. Why shouldn't you be able to harness new technology and make it respond to problems that have have arisen since it was first introduced. The other story in that category, I think you could probably file under Ed Davey having another one of his fever dreams, because the Liberal Democrats, it is reported this morning, should they get anywhere near power, are minded to ban noisy phone users on public transport. And we've talked about this recently. Sheila Fogarty has talked about it a lot. It is one of her major bugbears. I think you have to spend a lot of time on public transport to appreciate just how obnoxious it is. Few things funnier than listening to people who've never been on public transport in their lives trying to get some mileage out of a story like this. I was on a bus yesterday, the day before yesterday, when the woman sitting behind me conducted a full volume conversation on FaceTime. So there's no, she not only didn't have her headphones in, but I could hear everything that her interlocutor was saying. And it was in a foreign language, which meant you didn't even have the pleasure of eavesdropping. I think if it's in a foreign language, and I don't have, unfortunately, I'm not multilingual, I'm always reminded of that probably apocryphal story of somebody conducting a conversation on public transport in Wales, and a self-appointed guardian of St. George's Day values told them to stop talking, to speak English and stop talking foreign, to which they responded by saying, "I'm Welsh and I'm speaking Welsh in Wales." But this was not Welsh. I don't know what language it was, but it was more galling in a way than had it been English, because you've got the double frustration of not knowing what the hell is going on. At least if it's in a language you can comprehend, you can kind of compute the conversation. So the volume's incredibly annoying, whether it's in English or I don't know, merengue. But I don't know what the word is to describe it. It was a mum. She had a child sitting next to her. It wasn't some sort of deliberately obstreperous youth. You sort of associate this kind of behaviour. The last time we talked about it, we came to the notion that that some young people knew that they were being obnoxious when they did it, and that was why they did it. We took calls from some formerly obnoxious people, a category into which I suppose I would have to put myself. Formerly obnoxious people revealing the extent of their obnoxiousness, which is what I do when we talk about things like vegetarianism and obesity. Well, how did I end up being so obnoxious? And so it was only last week or the week before that our callers told us that the behaviour was prompted by their desire to upset people. They actually wanted to be obnoxious. So it's not that. It's something very different. It's something that is almost impervious to public disapproval. And it is so commonplace. The Liberal it's also very illiberal, which is quite an observation, isn't it? Ian Dunt made this point on Blue Sky earlier. It's very illiberal to fine people for exercising what is currently a freedom. It's almost the opposite of liberal. I mean, the liberal fever dream would be everybody listening to things at full volume on the same bus. It would be like a cacophony of awfulness. But it is very illiberal to amend, as the Liberal Democrats are hoping to do, the bus services bill currently going through Parliament, which would make it an offence to play sound out loud in England. I think on public transport, specifically, no, stations, bus stops. So on the public transport network, I don't know if it would work beyond the public transport network. You wouldn't want people to be fined for playing a little bit of music in the park. Don't at me to tell me that you would. Seriously, get over yourself. But on the public transport network, playing sounds out loud would become an offence. Two thoughts. The first actually falls apart if you read further into the story, because the first is, how on earth would that ever work? To which the answer is, a bloke in France has just been fined €200 for making a phone call on his speaker in a quiet area of Nantes station. He is currently challenging the penalty. So it could work. The second bit of who would actually impose it? Who would do it? And the second bit of the question on whether or not this would actually be feasible is that thing I just said. It is the question of who would do it. Who would do it? And what would become What would become finable? I beg your pardon. I said that. I did that thing that I always do. I say there are two things here, and then I forgot what the second one was. The second one was it's unfair because if you've got loads of money, you could sit there conducting all of your phone calls on full volume and just pay all the fines. Whereas if you're skint and you get busted, you could be in all sorts of trouble. So it's illiberal in both senses. It discriminates against the poor and it discriminates against the liberal, the vocally liberal, those who are liberal with their volume settings. It discriminates against Spinal Tap. So I don't want to talk about that. We talked a couple of weeks ago about the actual behaviours. And we could talk about them till the cows come home. Everybody that uses public transport is going to have a story. I've got one from literally 2 days ago, and a particularly obnoxious example of it as well, because I did the look. I did the look, and the look did nothing. There's nothing more frustrating than doing the look and getting nothing in return. It was Natalia yesterday, wasn't it, who talked about the look that her nan can give. But the look, I gave her the look. I looked over my shoulder. I gave her the look. I made eye contact with other passengers who approved of my look. You know, when you get that moment, they don't quite do the kind of nod, yeah, well done you. But they do the kind of, like, the very little minor eye roll. So I look over my shoulder. So I'm sitting directly in front of her. I look over my shoulder and I look at her, first of all, with a sense of benign puzzlement. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see the expression that I would use. In fact, I'll tell you what I'll do. Don't worry. I'll have to make some noise because otherwise the emergency tape will go off. And goodness knows what is the emergency tape at the moment, Keith? Do we not know? All right. So I'll have to make some noise because if there's a prolonged period of silence on the programme, then the technology concludes that something's gone wrong. And the emergency tape kicks in. So this is the benign look of puzzlement, all right? It's great radio, this. I know what you're thinking. This is the benign look of puzzlement. That's the benign look of puzzlement, as if I think you've made a terrible mistake and don't realise that you're conducting your private conversation at Spinal Tap volumes. You seem to have turned your volume up to 11, madam. And so the benign look of puzzlement, but benign puzzlement, once again. And that did nothing. That didn't touch the sides. So I turned back round again. I faced the front. I faff about on my phone for a bit. I finished the crossword. She's still going. There are quite odd periods of silence. So I can hear what's coming out of her phone and I can hear what's going into it, i.e. her. But then the odd periods of silence where I think she's hung up. And of course, because the conversation is not being conducted in English, I've got no way of knowing whether she's actually said goodbye or not. So you have that little flowering of false hope. Oh, thank goodness for that. She's finished. But they're just sort of on permanent phone. You know, like when you're a teenager and you're on the phone to your girlfriend or your boyfriend and you just sit there in silence for a while. Oh, yeah. And the other thing that happened, and so that kind of, so you keep thinking it might be over and then it pops up again. It sparks up. So then I do the look. And the look, I think, is fairly unambiguous. I'm not going to lie to you. I didn't do the look. I didn't make eye contact for the look because that would be intimidating and I'm a man and she's a woman. But I needed to move up a couple of notches from benign puzzlement. So I do the look and this is the look. That's the look. Sorry. Do you know what Keith said in my ear then? Did you hear it? Talk. It's easier said than done, Keith. You know, this stuff doesn't write itself. So then I do the look and I hold the look for long enough and sort of just not clock a couple of people elsewhere on the bus, bottom deck actually, a couple of people elsewhere on the bus who are kind of like, clearly on my side. They're giving her a look, but they're sitting behind her. So a fat lot of good that is. And she does nothing about it. Nothing about it. Do you mind? So I'm not doing that. I don't want your stories of this and I don't want your stories about what you do because it might work, it might not work, and we have heard them all before. I've got a very JOB question for you on this one. All right, you ready? How do we know if things are worse than they used to be? Not just in the arena of this kind of antisocial behaviour, but in general, because I'm getting older, you see. And I now catch myself, and Mrs. O'Brien frequently points out that I am getting quite tutty about younger people, not just younger people, but particularly younger people doing things that I used to do. So I don't know what that makes you. A hypocrite? An old git? Part of the problem? Part of the solution? I don't know. But how do we know whether things are getting worse or not? So I can be 100% certain, 100% certain that this particular phenomenon is much, much worse than it was 2 years ago, 5 years ago. You can't go back too far because the technology didn't exist. But it's the worst it's ever been. By a country mile, it used to be remarkable to encounter somebody either listening to their music or conducting a loud, speakered telephone conversation on public transport or in a public place, even in a cafe or, even on the platform, it's obnoxious. So we know it's getting worse. And that's the second question. Why? So question number one, I don't think you can answer this. That's what I meant by it being a very JOB topic. I don't think we can answer this question. I usually try and find a Thucydides quote at this point, but it turns out it wasn't Thucydides, it was Socrates, and it wasn't actually real. But it's the idea that people have been complaining about the behaviour of the young for thousands of years, which is true. But this is not about the young. The woman sitting behind me was late 30s, early 40s probably. So what is that about? So you and I would never dream of doing that in a million years. If we did, it would probably be knowing it was obnoxious and doing it because it was obnoxious and feeling, I don't know, empowered by our obnoxiousness. Why is it happening so much? But if you really want to go to the top of the class, I want you to tell me how you know that antisocial behaviour is worse now than it used to be. Because I'm not sure it is. I think we just pick up on new things. There's two ways into the conversation, all right? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. How do we know things are worse than they used to be when it comes to antisocial behaviour? And I suppose I should also do the proper phone, shouldn't I? Would you welcome this? If you're a bus driver or a train guard, a train conductor, it's a good one for the RMT. How are you going to impose this if you haven't got any guards on the trains? Is it feasible? I mean, it's a nightmare sometimes dealing with antisocial behaviour on public transport. This wouldn't necessarily involve exposing yourself to risk, going up to a middle-aged mother and saying, excuse me, could you stop having a phone call at Spinal Tap level volumes? And she'd just go, oh yes, I'm terribly sorry, and put her phone away. You don't need to fine her unless she carries on. So would it work? Do you approve of it? 38% of respondents to Lib Dem polling were all in favour. Okay, so that's question number one. 0345 6060 973. Question number two, how do we know whether things are better or worse generally when it comes to antisocial behaviour? And question number three, what the hell is wrong with these people? That woman. What was wrong with that woman? 0345 6060 973. What make sense of all of this for me now, please.
James O'Brien on LBC.
22 minutes after 11 is the time, and it's a weird one, but and I'm minded, by the way, to challenge your claims that we definitely know things are worse than they used to be. Things ain't what they used to be. But when it comes to Lib Dem proposals or Lib Dem plans to fine people for being noisy on the public transport network with their in a way it's discrimination against people who just shout at the moon, isn't it? It's if you're shouting into a phone you could get a fine. If you're just shouting the odds, I presume that you'd be okay. But the Lib Dems are thinking about bringing it in, and that is why we are talking about it. Brian is in Leicester. Morning, Brian.
Good morning, sir. How are you?
Very well.
I've got through. Very good, thank you. Well, I'm recovering from a double hernia off, but that's okay.
Oh, yeah. You need to work on your core strength.
Yeah, well, that's talking. So I'm talking to you, sir.
You and me both. Anyway, go on. What do you want to say?
Right. So I was interested in this.
Yes.
A couple of points. First of all, you're asking about. Well, I'll come on to about the finding in a sec. I'll come on to your other question,
go on.
Which is how do we know it's worse? Well, I'm 63, so I think I'm a bit older than you.
Yes.
So I've been around a while, and I've worked in various places. And like I ran a charity shop, for instance.
Right.
And people would queue up, and then they would get to the desk. So there's me on the desk, the till.
Yeah.
And they would suddenly go on their phone.
Yeah.
And keep the whole of the rest of the people. Now, that would never happen. They used to write books about etiquette.
Respectfully, Brian, nobody had a mobile phone when you were their age. They hadn't been invented, mate.
But you wouldn't do it, would you?
Yeah, but you can't, you can't claim that things are worse.
It.
They might have picked their nose or something, or spat. They might have done something else
or
that you...
talk to their mate, but they wouldn't.
Yes,
They wouldn't.
All right, then. Guess what year this is from? Ready? The young people of today think of nothing but themselves. They have no reverence for parents or old age. They are impatient of all restraint. As for the girls, they are forward, immodest and unladylike in speech, behaviour and dress. Guess what year that's from?
1940.
No. Guess again.
22.
No. Guess again.
18.
1274, Brian. 1274. Peter the Hermit sounds exactly like
what
you.
What does that prove? It shows that it's got worse and worse since then.
No, it doesn't. It proves that Brian the Hermit in Leicester is just the latter-day version of Peter the Hermit in 1274.
Really?
Although, admittedly, you can't run a charity shop if you're a hermit.
No. Well, good point. I'm glad you thought that one through. And the other point I want to make is about the fines. My suggestion, and I smoke cigars, and this is relevant, if you have specific areas where people have to go to smoke, let's have specific areas where people have to go to use their mobile phone. And you know what you do? You know how you come to a junction and you've got the yellow boxes
But you're cross with people who are using their phones normally. This is a conversation about people who are using their speakers.
Well, I don't know how to use that on my phone.
You've already bless you. You've already got quiet carriages on trains. I know they're not like cast in stone, but you can.
Well, in public in general. So if you want to confine people who smoke to a particular area, do the same.
Well, no. With respect, I think you've crossed over into miserabilism. There's a massive difference. No, you haven't. There's a massive difference between having a normal conversation in a normal place at a normal volume and either pulling your phone out for a chat when you're supposed to be paying for your trousers in a charity shop or conducting it at full volume on speaker in the middle of a bus. No one's really got a problem with people conducting normal volume conversations. It's why Dom Jolly was funny back in the day because he was lampooning people who shouted, not people who were normal on the phone.
But the point is, we don't want to hear Mrs. Miggins ordering her fish and chips or having a conversation. Do that privately.
No, I'm sorry, Brian. I know this is your debut on the show, but I'm not. It's not gone well, mate. It's not. You're not hitting your marks. You sound like Peter the Hermit.
Okay. Well, I'd be rather Peter the Hermit than somebody shouting on the phone.
I look forward to the next one. I really do. Brian, top man, thank you. Plato. And this is the one I think might have been apocryphal, but apparently not. 4th century BC. Shall I save that for another caller? Hit them over the head with it, or do you want to hear it now? 4th century BC. Plato. What is happening to our young people? You almost hear Victor Meldrew's voice there, can't you? What is happening to... I don't believe it. They disrespect their elders. They disobey their parents. They ignore the law. They riot in the streets inflamed with wild notions. Wild notions! My first band was called Wild Notions. Their morals are decaying. What is to become of them? It's a Guardian article I'm reading it from. One about the mosquito device that they put outside shops to make youths disperse. It going back to 2009, I think. But I think that's the quote I thought was Thucydides and turned out not to be anybody. But I could be wrong. Where am I going next? Stephen is in Leeds. Stephen, what would you like to say?
I don't think I can compete with Plato 2,500 years ago on that one.
I think it's made up, but it's in the Guardian, so it must be true.
Well, yeah, obviously. When you look back, James, when you look back to COVID, when we were all locked down, you remember when we couldn't see anybody. So we'd be walking around our kitchen, we'd be cooking, we'd be doing jigsaws, we'd be playing music, we'd have the phone on the side, we'd have it on speaker, we might have a group chat, we might have a video chat. I've noticed, I mean, I'm 50 years old, 3 years younger than you, so I've been brought up in the same kind of Nokia snake kind of era. Yeah, really on the tune with the snake. But now I've gone from the transition of pre-COVID. I didn't see the people walking around the street. I've got an office on the high street, and I see people walking, kids mainly. But they've got the phone in front of them like they're looking at a photograph, but they're actually having a conversation. I never, and I'd like your opinion on this, I never, pre-COVID, pre-lockdown, I never really saw that behaviour until after we came out of lockdown, and that, I think, behaviour carried on.
And then if you see other people, so for the older generations, if they see other people doing it, they think it's normal.
But I think there's still bemusement. There's still bemusement with me, to be honest.
I'm bemused.
I understand during lockdown while you're going about your business, you might be doing the garden.
This is why the look of benign puzzlement, I thought, would be so effective on Tuesday. You just sort of look at someone in a way that makes them go, "Oh, blimey, I'm behaving as if I'm in my kitchen and I'm on a crowded bus," and it didn't even touch the sides. It didn't make the blindest bit of difference to anything.
I don't think the transition's been.
No, I think you're right.
Being implemented.
What about the lockdown parties? Gary says the lockdown parties at number 10 sent a message to the population that they can do whatever they wanted.
Exactly. I mean, the most arrests for breach of lockdown was in one postcode, which was Downing Street.
I love the fact that we've talked about the collapse of the world order evinced by Donald Trump's abandonment of Ukraine and people being too loud on the bus, and both stories have brought us back to Boris Blinking Johnson. That's quite an achievement for the old booby.
Well, it's an achievement to the stupidity of the general public. It's an achievement to the people that are putting that on them because it's boiling the frog.
I've got another one for you. This is from a 6,000-year-old Egyptian tomb.
Go on.
We live in a decaying age. Young people no longer respect their parents. They are rude and impatient. They frequently inhabit taverns and have no self-control.
Nothing changes, James.
Plus ça change.
What are we moaning about?
That's my point. Plus ça change. What is it? Plus la même chose. Something like that. Here's Thomas Watts with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 33 minutes after 11. Ian begs to differ. He says, James, I love you, but I do disagree. Remember, if you want your criticism to be read out, you have to start the message with I love you, but. Annoying FaceTime conversations on public transport in my native English are way worse than in languages I don't understand, because with understanding comes banality and the stupid waffle that makes me at times embarrassed to share a nationality, never mind a bus, with these people. P.S. Check out the Oblivion remake on the PlayStation. You're welcome. And Dan Snow, the history guy, possibly has got the quote that I've been confusing with Thucydides from 43 BC. Times are bad, children no longer obey their parents, and everyone is writing a book. That's beautiful. That's absolutely beautiful. Yeah, they'll let anyone write a book these days. Natasha Clark, LBC's political editor, is here because I thought Rachel Reeves was in Washington.
She is.
But you've spoken to her anyway?
On the phone.
Did you have it on speaker?
No.
Thank goodness for that. Did she?
She may have done. I don't know.
That's interesting. Okay. Anyway, that is not the most important element of this exchange.
Not. I think she would probably really agree with this idea, though. I think she would really support the idea that we should clamp down hard on people listening to their phones or making loud conversations on public transport. But yes, not talking to her about that. Keir Starmer, under mounting pressure from the EU and his own backbench MPs today to look seriously at the idea of a youth mobility deal. You've talked about this quite a lot on the show in recent months, where young people could travel more freely on the continent. And the EU boss, Ursula von der Leyen, she's meeting Keir Starmer today in number 10. We expect this to probably be a part of their conversation. And there's a Crunch Summit in London next month she's coming back here for. Meanwhile, today, a letter to Nick Thomas-Symonds, he's the minister negotiating that Brussels deal. MPs and peers have called for what they call a time-limited capped youth visa scheme. And it just goes to the heart of that age-old row that happens between the Treasury and the Home Office, seemingly under every government now. The Treasury wants to increase migration to see growth, and of course the Home Office don't want to do that. They want to drive down the numbers. And there are reports today that Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, wants to see a cap on migration.
Because these would add to numbers, however you diced it.
Exactly.
Temporary. It would be the incoming this year. So net migration, this would be in the plus column, not the minus column.
Yeah, totally.
Even if it was contractually temporary, or even if it was reciprocal, or whatever. So that if you're focusing only on numbers rather than humanity or economic growth, then it's a bad. In the land of Lord Farfar, it's a bad thing.
Totally, and that's exactly the reason why so many people think that we should take the student numbers out of migration figures, because many of them, of course, go back to the countries which they came over from after they finished their studies. But the Prime Minister, of course, has said repeatedly, and we've talked about this, about how he's wanting to be quite hardline on immigration. He wants to reduce those numbers. The Home Office say they want to see a time limit on any of those visas that come. So basically you can come here for 12 months, but then you've got to go back. And of course they don't want to put a cap on it, because that would essentially reduce the growth that the Treasury thinks they might be able to get from getting people over here. Anyway, I spoke with Rachel Reeves. Of course, you say she's in Washington. I asked her yesterday whether a youth mobility scheme could help boost our UK growth and our relationships with Europe too. She told me this is on the table.
This Labour government is going to bring down net migration, and we are not going to return to free movement. We need to be able to determine who comes into our country and the needs of our economy, and those things are non-negotiable. We are hosting a summit. There will be a summit between the UK and the EU in May, and that summit will be focused on reducing some of the trade barriers that exist between our countries. But we've got to bring down net migration, and we will bring down net migration.
It sounds like that's not quite off the table. Is that fair to say?
Well, those discussions with our colleagues and allies in the European Union are ongoing at the moment. We made a clear manifesto commitment to bring down net migration and for no return to free movement within the European Union. It is important that we determine who comes into our country, and those things are not up for negotiation.
And James, you know, of course, the UK already has loads of these deals with countries around the world, Australia, Canada. It is not totally out of the question to think that we could get a similar deal with the EU. However, ministers already getting into a bit of a tussle behind the scenes about this one.
There's the other element to it as well, which we sometimes forget because we look at everything through one end of the telescope. In that this is quite desirable for the European Union. I mean, it might be good for economic growth and the business, but from the point of view of selling it to your own population, this would be a win for them.
Yeah, totally.
To say to their young people, you can now go to Britain again and work there as part of your youth, and that means that we would want something in return.
Absolutely, and I think one minister told me that they would let something like this happen over my dead body unless they get something from Brussels in return.
Exactly that.
And that they think that Brussels are just playing hardball with us. And look, this is the very start of these.
That's how it works. We're a third country.
Totally.
Turns out they didn't need us more than we needed them, but that ship has sailed.
Exactly. We're not refighting those old battles, except we are. And yeah, we're literally just at the beginning of those reset talks, and we're expecting it to include loads of different things: defence, fish, the renegotiation of the Brexit deal, customs checks. They're all up for discussion again. I also spoke with the Chancellor about the idea of a US trade deal. Now, it's your favourite subject. I asked her when we might see that deal come.
I'm confident that there is a deal to be done between the UK and the US. And it is very clear, I'm in the US now, that the US administration as well want to do a deal with the UK. But it's important that we get the right deal for Britain, that we don't rush into a deal, but we do the right deal in our British national interest. I recognise the huge challenges that businesses, including in the automotive sector, are facing at the moment. It's why, as a government, we announced more flexibilities for our car manufacturers on the shift to electric vehicles to better support them through these challenging times. And it's also why we are working as hard as we can to get a deal with the United States, a deal that is in our country's national interest.
So now she's saying, not so fast, we want to take our time with this, which implies that it might not be quite as easy as once they first thought to get this deal over the line.
Can they not sign one of those can we better not flavoured memorandums of understanding and pretend it's a massive trade deal when it's nothing of the sort? Sorry.
Well, that's kind of what they were trying to do. But according to some reports in the Wall Street Journal that have come out overnight, the Americans have thrown a few last-minute cogs into the machine, including on hormone-treated beef, other things, food standards. That is just something that the UK government don't want to countenance. They'd rather align with EU standards on food, not US. So is it all going to be completely blown up? Who knows?
It would be throwing the farmers under the bus as well, in a way that previous governments and people like Lord Farfar threw the fishing industry under the bus with Brexit itself. No one really raises the point. It's probably because I'm such a pessimist. But why would anybody want a trade deal with someone who's just proved that he doesn't respect the terms of any trade deals that he's already part of?
Yeah, totally. And
it's a bit like a peace deal with Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, and it's obviously clear that he's not, he's obviously interested in doing something. But, if they're throwing last minute sort of things like this into the mix, who's to say they're not going to do that again somewhere down the line? And who's to say they're not going to rip up the idea of it? Trump's pulled out of more accords than you and I can name, right?
Oh, is that the best you could come up with? Did you search them for a funny analogy? He's pulled out, go try and think of someone who's done a lot of pulling out, and you can't think of it. I do that all the time. That's why I usually lose my thread. He's pulled out of more accords than
you can think of.
I don't know. Someone's pulled out of something.
Yeah,
something.
No, he has, because obviously...
I know he has, and he hasn't stopped yet.
Yeah, and I think he's obviously growing bored board of the idea that he can get this Ukraine deal because he doesn't it's actually figuring out that it's tougher than he thinks. I think that
and if he abandons Ukraine, should we still be going to him with our negotiating hat on?
I think the argument from government is we have to, right? They are putting 25% tariffs on our car industry. They are saying that actually they're going to have to make job losses within weeks unless we have to do something. I think for Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer, they have to throw the book at it. Like, it is worth tens of thousands of jobs, tens of thousands of livelihoods in this country. They absolutely have no choice. They have to do it. Even if we can't take Donald Trump at his word, they have to at least give it a shot. And I think that's the feeling in government is we've got to give it everything before we say, nope, sorry, we tried our best, we couldn't make it work.
Thank you, Natasha. A good piece by Jessica Elgott in The Guardian today, knitting together some of these threads and having a little look at the broader picture of reset strategy. She suggests it's to make Brussels boring again. But there's a statistic in it that I alluded to earlier this week but forgot to share properly. It's from the Badgett column in The Economist. 2/3 of the people who have died since 2020 supported leaving the EU. So that gives great sympathy for obviously the loss of loved ones, but great succour to people who recognise the necessity of moving back closer to them. But crucially, it comes out in polling that the people who voted for it still don't really blame themselves. They think that it's all the fault of the people who negotiated the last deal. So you have that double delusion, that unicornism is still abroad, which is part of the reason why Reeves and Starmer won't say the things that the people who have been proved conclusively right about everything in the aftermath of Brexit want to hear them say.
And it's the same sort of Liz Trussism, isn't it, of saying, well, we didn't really properly try it.
Actually, while you're here, what happens now to the sort of Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, if, and I think I'm probably going to say when Donald Trump completely abandons Ukraine, when he throws his lot in completely with Vladimir Putin, what happens to the British politicians who have either been very outspoken in their support for Donald Trump or, in the case of Boris Johnson, adamant that he would never abandon Ukraine? It's unhelpful that they're all Brexiters, because that gives us a hint of how they might behave. They might just never mention it again and hope that the problem goes away. But does it put people in a tricky position? So the abandonment of Ukraine, when even a year ago it was the only thing that everybody in Parliament could agree on.
Yeah, it puts Boris Johnson particularly in a tricky position because he's obviously been doing quite a lot of work behind the scenes for the government, and under Rishi Sunak he was doing a lot of the groundwork, laying it in case of the case of a Donald Trump win, and was having conversations with him, we hear in America, about how he shouldn't abandon Ukraine, and having dinners with him and you know, sort of trying to put on the soft diplomacy because Boris Johnson and Donald Trump seemingly got on. So yeah, if there is a case where he does abandon Ukraine, it's gonna be put Boris Johnson in a particularly difficult situation because he has been very, very praising about Donald Trump, hasn't he? So it's awkward, it's embarrassing, yes, but we're not there yet, and I'm more optimistic than you.
Oh, good. Well, we fall into the trap of speculating upon Boris Johnson's behaviour as if he was in possession of a sense of shame.
Well, I think we'll all agree on Boris Johnson. He absolutely, what's that definition of him that someone described him as? A trolley. He veers around all over the place. The wheels are basically coming off. No one knows which way he's going to go next, and he only listens to the last person he spoke to.
It was Dominic Cummings who came up with that description. He's in the news today after our good friend Peter Gagan secured something of a victory in the realms of freedom of information. I shall share a few more details of that with you shortly. But in the meantime, Natasha Clark, thank you very much.
James O'Brien on LBC.
47 is the time. Trisha in Edinburgh has got my little grey cells whirring. James, how is the Brexit vote of people who have died actually known? Is it part of the post-death admin now to tell someone or record it on the certificate? It's a great question, that. And it reminds me, I haven't mentioned Mystery Hour yet today. We're 12 minutes out from Mystery Hour. That's precisely the sort of thing that could pop up. I imagine that they do it via age demographics. So we have some fairly reliable research into how various age groups voted in the referendum. And then you marry that to the statistics regarding the age group, the actual ages of the people who have passed, and you know with a certain degree of accuracy that you will have the knowledge you need to conclude that 2/3 of the people who have died since 2020 supported leaving the EU. But don't take it up with me. Take it up with The Economist, no less, on this occasion. 11:48 is the time. Back to the Liberal Democrats' desire to see people behaving or people conducting very loud conversations or playing music and videos on their phone speaker. It's all about the speakers, not the bass. It's all about the speakers. On public transport would be fined up to £1,000. There's a bunch of questions, and to be fair, the lad's been on hold for so long that Rajdev in Twickenham probably can't remember which one he rang in to answer. Can you, Rajdev?
I think I remember what I was going to say anyway.
Oh, fantastic!
Which helps. What I was going to say was I think I'm old enough to remember that my early formative years, punks and skinheads and football fans on the bus harassing people at various stages without necessarily playing loud music. I mean, in those days, again, you'd have to carry around a huge tape-playing device if you wanted to harass people playing music. And nowadays, obviously, kids have got phones so they can just put in their pocket to do exactly the same thing. But I think that what I was trying to say was that we've always had these issues just manifested.
So how do we know they're worse? How do we know they're worse?
Well, I can't really say that they're worse. That's my point. I'm trying to say that they're different. They
I
evolve
think you're right.
over time. And the comment you made about Dom Jolly and the mobile phone guy, the reason that was funny, I remember that, what was it, in the 2000s?
Yeah.
The reason that was funny because it was a bit outlandish. That caricature was outlandish in the same way that Ali G and Catherine Tate caricatures were.
Yes.
But those have all become normalised now, those caricatures. They wouldn't be funny anymore for the current generation.
That's incredible, now. Isn't it, actually? I hadn't thought of that. I wonder what Dom thinks, whether or not he thinks it would still be funny now, given that it is not extraordinary behaviour. And people in Trigger Happy really reacted if you watched it, and everybody jumped. The reaction was as funny as it was part of the comedy, wasn't it? The reaction was part of the gag. And whereas now, people might be struck by the size of his phone, but not by the loudness of his voice, because at least he wasn't on speaker. So there's probably someone next to him who's been even more obnoxious in real life rather than parody.
Exactly. So I think societal expectations change in the same way, that if you watch something like Ali G and how he talks, you can go into any school in the country now and say the kids will talk the same way now, as a matter of course.
So it wouldn't be funny. The kind of the white guy trying to adopt that curious patois wouldn't be funny because it is not exceptional anymore. Good Lord. I mean, I tell you what you've done. You've come to a phone-in about speakers, and you've brought us a contemplation upon social change, upon the relationship between satire and societal change, Rajdev. I bet you didn't think you were going to do that when you woke up this morning.
No, to be honest, I was about to hang up because I was waiting so long.
Well, I'm glad you didn't. There you go. That's your PhD thesis for the day. Explain the relationship between satire and societal change. Watching. Here you go. You could get it. Watching Trigger Happy in 2025. The relationship between satire and societal change by Rajdev in Twickenham. 11:51 is the time. And of course you have to begin 6,000 years ago with the inscription on the Egyptian tomb that says we live in a decaying age. Young people no longer respect their parents. This could be everybody. It could be Catherine Tate's nan. It could be Victor Meldrew. It could be the old Gits. Was it Harry Enfield and Paul Whitehouse? Did they have old Gits? Or have I imagined that whole thing? What's the latest? What's the modern? It was Viz, was it? Viz very strong on this. What's the most modern iteration of old people, comedy old people complaining about young people? I don't know what the most up-to-date iteration, without mentioning any colleagues, the most up-to-date iteration of old people just moaning endlessly about young people. I can't think what it is, for comedic value. We live in a decaying age, because this is 6,000 years old. Young people no longer respect their parents. They are rude and impatient. They frequently inhabit taverns. It's a great word, taverns. I might start using... No, that would be so. It'd be like wearing a bow tie, wouldn't it? It would start off ironic, and then you'd just be the idiot who uses the word taverns instead of a pub while wearing a bow tie. They have no self-control. Tom's in Camden. Tom, what do you reckon?
I'm just wondering whether I should even tell you what I'm thinking, because it appears that satire is actually like a premonition of the society we're going to be living in as a normal society within the next couple of years.
This is chapter 2 of the PhD thesis. You're absolutely right, aren't you? It's like a prophet. Satire as prophecy.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, go on, take your chances.
Well, I was going to mention on the subject of the noise or behaviour that people are displaying in public spaces that have become such a... is it an epidemic or is it a pandemic? My London experience suggests it's an epidemic.
Yes.
And I go specifically to 2010 when I started doing a lot of walking in public parks, the royal parks of London.
Yeah.
And I was trying to film quietly animal life, but found it impossible to do so because of dog interference. I would kindly approach the dog owner, ask them if they could keep their dog under control, and I'd get a whole load of abuse thrown back at me.
I mean, parks are designed more for the exercising of canines than for the indulgence of filming wildlife. I don't want to pick a fight. I don't want to pick a fight with you. I'm not sure this is evidence of the malaise that we're chronicling.
Well, it depends upon how each individual approaches it. Because if you're there taking a photograph, and you're not disturbing anyone, and you're not disturbing the wildlife, someone else's canine is.
Yeah, I know. I mean, we're not going to conclude this conversation today, but the park is, I mean, just in terms of simple utilitarianism, there's a hell of a lot more people exercising their dogs in the park than there are people trying to film wildlife unmolested by dogs.
Okay, we go to the Acts of Parliament upon which the parks are regulated.
Oh, Lord. I thought we were going to return to the topic actually under discussion. Give me your views on the fines. The fines. Go on.
We are going to return to that subject. It's just that I mentioned that this is where I started noting behaviour change in the park, which was I'd get a 4-letter word thrown at me, followed by a 3-letter word. Now, it isn't that same response. I've given up, by the way, with dogs because it is, it's too
You're
big
on hiding
an issue.
to nothing.
Yeah.
Is it a 3-letter word, you?
No, off.
Oh, yeah, okay, carry on. So I was confused for a minute, sorry.
Oh, it could be a U.
Yeah, I know it could. No, I know. I worked out. I knew what the 4-letter word was, Tom. I was just struggling. I just got a bit temporarily distracted by the 3-letter word. Anyway, we're gonna run out of time. So go on. Let me push you. I'll shut up for a while. Yes.
Okay. Moving on very quickly. This issue about noise, whether it is someone shouting very loudly, calling to their I'll keep off the subject of pets.
Yes.
Calling to their pets. But if it's someone who's let's say they're using amplified sound.
Yes.
Which is what the park regulates against. And it's policed by the Metropolitan Police. So if they find an offender, they can, right now, take them to court. It's a criminal offence, as is antisocial behaviour in the parks.
So the law is probably already there in some spaces. It's just not enforced.
Now we can get on to the reason why it's not enforced. As a member of public, if you approach someone and say to them, by the way, you're causing a statutory, it's an act of Parliament offence. You've got amplified sound. Could you please turn your music down, your radio down, whatever it is? You end up not with the 4-letter and the 3-letter, but you end up with a counter-allegation, which is, don't touch me, get away from me. I'm not homosexual. I'm not gay. And you think, where the hell has this come from? Why is this person...
I know exactly the feeling you describe.
Yeah, and you think,
where the hell does this come from?
Yeah.
Yes. Well, you shouldn't be touching people generally, anyway. But so what you're describing, you're describing an evolution of reaction, and things are now more violent and more frenzied than they have ever been before, which I think is probably true. And also tacks back to lockdown, when we kind of emerged from lockdown with a very enhanced sense of our own individualism, which explains two things in the context of today's conversation. Why we continue to conduct conversations in public as if we were sitting alone in our kitchen, and why perhaps any interference in our conduct is seen as an affront on a level that it wasn't seen before. Tom, there's a lot of food for thought there. I'm grateful. You also, while you made that point about satire coming true, you made some of my favourite television shows pop into my head, for which I thank you. Brass Eye. I don't know, is it true that Chris Morris stopped making Brass Eye because it was all coming true? Watch the episode about cake, the made-up drug, and tell me that wasn't just a complete reflection of reality. And Nathan Barley. The brilliant Nathan Barley was a perfect prediction, actually, as James in Marseille points out, of exactly where hipsters would be about 20 years later. I think that's it. Can I squeeze in Darren in Wimbledon or not? Darren, I'll give you a minute, mate. What would you like to say?
Yeah, hello there.
Hello.
Yeah, you've literally just name-checked what I was going to say.
Oh, no, sorry.
Nathan Barley.
Yes.
Nathan Barley, do you remember the quote, they babble on their handheld twit machines?
Yes. That still works. I was mentioning Nathan Barley for different reasons, but there it is.
It is, isn't it? And I'll tell you as well, with the phone, I call it the phone TWAT, with those people, right, it's not an age thing.
No, it's not.
MEPs do it. People in their 40s, 50s,
I know. Why?
Everyone.
Briefly, what do you think has changed? Why? Because you and I would know, and obviously for people who are capable of spelling, I should apologise for for Darren's contribution there. Well-intentioned though it was, and at least slightly camouflaged. What's changed? What's changed in a sentence? Why did the people, some people, whatever age they are, just think that it's fine?
Lack of self-awareness, selfishness, not really caring about anybody else, living in their own bubble, in their own space.
I think I'm kinder than you. I'm looking for a more benign explanation. I don't think they're sitting there thinking I'm more important than you, I don't care about anybody else. There's something else it's like I've got spark plugs in my mind's eye, and the spark is not moving from one plug to the other. It's a failure rather than a willful act of obnoxiousness, but maybe that's just me being it's my curse, the curse of excessive niceness. Darren, great work, thank you. It's coming up to 12 noon. It's Thursday. I mean, in many ways, the last hour, every show, every hour is a mystery in a way that we seek to solve together, but this hour, the final hour of Thursday's show, is on a whole different level. It's mystery hour, literally. Many, many mysteries, and hopefully many, many solutions. If you've got one of the former, ring me now. If you've got one of the latter, and you discover shortly, then ring me then.
James O'Brien on LBC.
3 minutes after 12 is the time, and you are listening to Mystery Hour with James O'Brien. Your weekly opportunity to achieve the sort of satisfaction not ordinarily available anywhere else on your radio dial. I work on the principle that you're largely familiar with how this unfolds, and if you're not, that you'll work it out pretty quickly. It doesn't sound very exciting if you're new to the programme. I appreciate this isn't how you're supposed to introduce radio features, but it is very exciting. There you go, that's how you're supposed to do it. It doesn't sound very exciting, but it is very exciting. Do you ever think I could have made a career in advertising copyright? It doesn't sound very exciting, but it is very exciting. Watch this film. It doesn't sound very exciting. No. Anyway, so someone rings in with a question. Lots of people ring in with questions. You perhaps ring in with a question. 0345 6060 973. And then hopefully somebody else rings in with the answer. Yeah, I told you it doesn't sound very exciting, but it is. You're just going to have to trust me. If you hear a question that you know the answer to, you kind of have to ring in. Otherwise, you can't listen to the show for 2 days. You can't listen to the show until next Tuesday. The number you need remains the same, 0345 6060 973. Poor old Tom. It caused quite a reaction in my inbox with his objection. I don't think he was complaining about dogs chasing squirrels, Chris. I think it was more dogs disturbing him while he was doing his thing. Anyway, we digress. If you are fortunate enough to make my favourite contribution of the day, you will get a Mystery Hour board game. Literally, signed, sealed, delivered. Well, not signed, but sealed and delivered. You can get it signed if you want, but you'll have to find me at some point in the future. If the management's decision is final, the full terms, and I am the management, the full terms and conditions can be found at lbc.co.uk. If you want to find out more about the Mystery Hour board game, then mysteryhour.co.uk is the website that you need. And Tim's on fire. Think everyone be like Tim. Hallelujah, he writes, in a little nod to the Osmosis chorus. My 12 p.m. meeting has just been cancelled, so I can listen to Mystery Hour. # winning, he didn't add, but could have done. Find out why Mystery Hour prompts such excitement in so many people by staying tuned. I think that's it. Is that it? Keith's been in touch, not that one, another one. Keith says, I can usually answer 50 to 75% of the questions, but can never get through. What's the secret? Keith, it depends whether you're asking, I can never get on air, or I can never get through to the studio. If you ring in and you never get put on air, my advice to you would be, don't sound like a bloke that texts claiming that he can answer 50 to 75% of the questions. That would just some friendly advice. If you can't even get through to the studio, where you intend to sound like a bloke who texts in saying that he can answer 50 to 75%, then there is no secret. It's judicious use of redial. It is it's just luck of the draw. 7 after 12. John's in Thetford. John, question or answer?
Hi, James. Yeah, it's about ferrets.
Oh, yes.
I was thinking of taking my dog abroad, so I sort of checked legislation.
Yes.
And all the legislation is for dogs, cats, and ferrets.
Yes.
Why ferrets specifically on legislation of travelling with a pet?
Well, I presume it's a very good. I mean, I have to check.
Have you ever seen anyone travelling with a ferret?
It's hard to tell, isn't it? Because they're usually kept down the carrier's trousers.
Well, absolutely. The only ferret I've ever seen in my life, I lived in rural Oxfordshire and Norfolk, is down Chris Tarrant's trousers on the opening of a village fete.
Chris Tarrant turned up at what was it, Thetford village? That's not a village. What village was it?
It was
East Ludden.
No,
Didlington. Chris Tarrant turned up at the Didlington village fete with a ferret down his trousers.
Absolutely, yes.
Well, I'm going to alert the news desk. Can we alert the news desk? When was this?
He was on Tiswas at the time.
No, oh, crikey, we're going back a very long time.
Yeah.
I was once in the audience on Tiswas, but that's a story for another day. So what we want to know is why ferrets. Well, is it because ferrets might have been transported to the continent for sporting purposes?
Well, I wouldn't have thought so. I mean, why not aardvarks or giraffes?
Well, you don't send aardvarks or giraffes down rabbit warrens to get the rabbits out, do you? Ferrets have a use in country sports.
Yeah, but giraffes could stick their heads down rabbit warrens, couldn't they?
How many people have got a pet giraffe? To which he responds by saying, how many people have got a pet ferret?
Well, you don't live in Setford Forest like I do.
So a lot of people have ferrets.
Yeah.
And they might want to take them on holiday. So I think you're answering your own question. It's specifically, it's a law that is normal for Norfolk. I'll put it on the list. I'm taking you at your word that ferrets, dogs and cats are the sole focus of the legislation that you have encountered. Thank you, John. There's a lad at school who had a ferret. There is a story. There's a lad at school who had a ferret. And everyone, I think, thought, what's he got a ferret for? And he went on to be the producer of David Attenborough's television programmes. So his early interest in natural history actually led to an entire career. Phil's in Croydon. Phil, question or answer?
Hello, James. I have a question for you.
Hello, Phil.
It's the annual snooker question.
Who are you rooting for?
I don't know. Judd Trump did look fairly impressive last night.
He looked unbeatable last night, yeah. But I've got such a soft... And Ronnie O'Sullivan, obviously, everybody wants to win, but it's a bit obvious. I've got such a soft spot for Sean Murphy, you know.
Yeah,
I love
he's
Sean
one of my
Murphy.
favourites.
Anyway, I digress. What do you want to ask about the snooker?
Okay, has a snooker referee ever accidentally dropped the object ball into the middle of a pack of reds? And if so, what happened?
You mean when re-spotting the white, as it were, after the white's been potted by accident? Or do you mean when setting up the table?
More likely the pink or the black.
I can answer your question. I can answer your question up to a point. Oh, the object ball. Sorry, not the white ball. Yeah, of course. Never on television.
Mm-hmm.
Because if it had, then we'd know. The clip would be popping up on my algorithms. It's that time of year when my algorithms are full of snooker.
Mm-hmm.
Don't you think?
Fair point.
If it had actually been recorded, we'd all have seen it. It would be there because there's all sorts of stuff. I mean, the last one that popped up was when Ronnie was having a fight with someone. He was kicking off with someone about sitting in his line or fidgeting. Do you remember that? When he'd go down for a shot and then he'd come back up again and accuse his opponent of moving and fidgeting.
Yeah. I do indeed.
So it could be. Anyway, I'll put it on there. Maybe a snooker referee on a non-televised game is listening and will ring in and say, you're never going to believe it, Phil and James, but I did that.
That's an obvious candidate for a radio tour, I think.
He won't be able to prove it, though. But it's on the list. And snooker at that time, I should have talked about it more. The reason why I haven't cashed out my Kidderminster Harriers bet, even though the bookies actually increased the amount that they're offering me to cash out since yesterday's show, I don't know whether they were listening or not. I was quite touched by the people who thought when I said it was quite a large bet, they thought it was a really, like hardcore gamblers were getting in touch to give me advice about what to do. And I'm like, no, all right, it was a large bet for me. It wasn't a large bet for high rollers or for proper gamblers, but it's big enough bet. It'll pay for me to get to Southport and back on Saturday and then some. But the reason I haven't cashed out is because I'd be tempted to stick the lot on Sean Murphy to win the World Championship again. And I don't know that would necessarily be a wise investment. And I must stop saying I digress. In fact, even better, I must stop digressing, and then I won't need to say I digress or remind myself to stop saying I digress. Tyler is in Huddersfield. Tyler, question or answer?
Hi, James. It's a question, please.
Carry on, Tyler.
I've been holding on to this question since July last year, so I hope it's a good one.
Well, you've built up some tension now, mate. Good luck.
I know. Right. When is the correct time to weigh a banana to figure out how many calories you are consuming?
Well, just before you... What? I don't understand the question, but that's almost certainly a me problem.
Right. So when you purchase a banana when it's probably just about turned yellow...
Yeah.
A medium banana, I've got so much data on this, but it's about 100 grams.
Right.
And just for argument's sake, it says on the label that 100 grams worth of banana is about 100 calories. It's a little bit less.
Yeah, for argument's sake.
A week later, if you've left that banana out of the fridge on your window ledge, that banana now is about 20% lighter. It's about 80 grams.
Is it?
Yeah.
You've conducted this experiment?
James, I have got a log since July, since I started calorie counting, of the weight of all my food that I've been eating.
And the banana is about 20% lighter after ripening, after further ripening, which makes sense because you're supposed to keep your banana with your avocado because the banana emits a gas that helps the avocado to ripen, doesn't it?
Didn't know that. But
you do now, in a paper bag ideally. But that explains the gas coming off the banana is part of the reason why it's got lighter.
Right. So if I weighed that banana when I first bought it at 100 grams and ate it, I'd be eating 100 calories.
Yeah.
But if I weighed it when it was 80 grams, I'd only be eating 80 calories according to the way it's calculated.
According to one metric, but is that metric reliable? Because it may have turned into more sugar as it's ripened. More of the banana has become sugar.
Right. So my question is, at what stage of the banana's ripeness is the best point to get an accurate measurement of how much calories you're eating?
I still don't think this is the right question. I think it's a fascinating area of scientific inquiry, but I don't think and it's the question you need an answer to. So it's the question that's going to go on the board, but I can't get it. I can't get to the correct question that a scientist would ask, but it's not the question you would ask. Because you measure how. I mean, okay. So if you take the accepted calorific content of a banana
per 100 grams,
100 grams, at what point should you weigh it?
Yes, because it changes weight over time, and I'll get different results.
So what stage of ripeness almost was a banana at when they calculated its average calorie content?
Yeah.
Love it. Okay, you're on. If we get an answer to this, Tyler, I'll give you the money myself.
Thank you, James.
Thank you, Tyler. It's 12:15.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:16 is the time. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where Mystery Hour questions include: why does legislation regarding the transit of animals to the continent, I think John was talking about the continent, wasn't he? Why does it specify dogs, cats and ferrets? Ferrets being the source of the question and indeed the confusion. Has a snooker referee ever dropped the ball he is respotting into the middle of the reds? And at what point on the ripeness scale is the calorific content of a banana calculated? I like that question more every time I try and articulate it, but I don't know if we'll get an answer. Charlotte is in Oxford. Charlotte, question or answer?
Hi, James. I have a question, please.
Carry on.
My question is about calendars, which may sound very boring to start off with, but go with me here. So I listen to a lot of podcasts and a lot of history podcasts, and they often say, on so-and-so date in something AD 74, considering we've only had the Gregorian calendar for about 500 odd years, how is it that they know that happened on a certain month, on a certain day, if the calendar wasn't in existence at the time? Does that make sense?
Kind of.
So I went to Pompeii last year for my birthday.
Oh,
lovely.
Yeah, I'd love to
love a bit of Pompeii.
A friend of mine is on their way to Pompeii. I had quite an odd experience at the weekend, Charlotte. Do you want to hear it?
Go for it, yeah.
This is quite sad, actually. It's a real reflection of my age. So a friend of ours said, we're going to Pompeii for the week. And I said, I'd love to go to Pompeii. And do you know what my wife said?
No.
She said, you've been to Pompeii. I said, what?
You've forgotten?
I'd forgotten that I'd been to Pompeii. So I thought, there's no way I've seen all the stuff that I've seen on screens in real life. And it turned out that we kind of parked in Pompeii very briefly on the way to Sorrento, and I haven't really been to Pompeii. But it was certainly one of those moments where I thought that I was losing my grip on reality. But anyway, back to you. You're off to Pompeii. So what calendar would they have been following then? The Julian calendar? What?
I think it was the Julian calendar. So you see all these signs that say, oh, this happened in this building, this is what this building was. And there's a sign that says, oh, it's understood that Pompeii happened in August 79 AD.
Yes.
It's like, well, did August even technically exist in its current format in 79 AD if they didn't have the Gregorian calendar? And how can they then be so certain?
Well, hang on. What's the difference between the Gregorian calendar and the Julian calendar?
I have no idea.
Because I don't think they're that different. They both had
something to do with leap years, I think it is.
No, the Julian calendar had a leap year.
I thought they introduced the Gregorian calendar to clarify leap years and to make it more scientifically accurate with the sun.
That maybe, but they definitely had leap years in the Julian calendars.
Okay.
Because it's the 365 and a quarter days, isn't it, in the solar cycle? But I think the answer to your question will be that they're referring to the Julian calendar.
And they've just then translated it into the Gregorian value.
Well, it was the same. That's why I asked what the difference is, because you've got 12 months. I think we've certainly got 365 days, so they might just have divided. And they still use it, I think, in the Orthodox Church and some parts of the world. So you would be. I'll put it there. What calendar? If you go to Pompeii and it says this happened in August of 30 AD, what calendar are they using? Is that the question?
Sort of, yeah.
I think they just reverse engineer the dates, as it were.
Yeah, okay.
But we need someone.
How do they know? How do they know it?
Yeah, I like it. No, I like it. I like it. It's a good question.
Thank you.
I just need to write your name down in case you win the prize. What have you listened to Alex Andreou's Podyssey podcast?
Oh, no. I am always looking for new podcasts, though. There's only so much Dan Snow's history hit I can keep re-listening to.
We're big fans of that. Big fans of Dan Snow on this program.
I know. I've listened to every single one, though, a few times over, and I need a few more new history podcasts.
Well, I got two recommendations for you. You can listen to Dan Snow on Full Disclosure with James O'Brien, which is available...
Oh, my 10-month-old has fallen over, excuse me, in the background.
I mean, that was quite a noise. I thought it was... I sounded... Anyway. And then Alex Andreou has one called Podyssey, which is about ancient Greek myths. So I think it would probably... Not right up your Strasser, but I think you'll enjoy it enormously. And it's quite beautifully put together. So there's two recommendations for you there. You can indulge your Dan Snow enthusiasm and you can broaden your historical horizons, or your mythological horizons at least. Thank you, Charlotte. 12:21 is the time. Jasper is in Cobham. Jasper, question or answer?
I have a question for you, James.
Carry on.
So I believe there's a common perception that humans did not coexist with dinosaurs. Right, that's what everyone seems to believe.
Yeah.
So why is it that there are so many myths about dragons, and the fact that dragons were drawn and actually look quite like dinosaurs? And dinosaurs have only really been discovered in the last, I can forget what year it was, a couple of 100 years or something.
Yeah.
But they just happen to look so similar.
I mean, it's going to be a very hard question to answer.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Because you're talking about a kind of almost a genetic memory, a pre-species. So before humans even began to start evolving, dinosaurs were extinct. And therefore, how can human... What word would we use? Imagination have come up with something that looks like a dinosaur.
Yeah, it's such an extraordinary coincidence if you think about it.
So, well, it's not, is it, though?
Yeah.
I don't think it is an extraordinary coincidence. Have you ever seen...
That's why I think they must have existed at the same time, surely.
No, that... My goodness.
Actual clear evidence.
You cannot. Of course there's clear evidence. You can't leap from the fact that there are some dragons in medieval iconography to the conclusion that the whole of scientific history must be wrong and humans clearly knocked about with dinosaurs back in the day. Have you ever seen a Komodo dragon?
Yes.
Well, there's your answer. So just imagine a giant one that breathes fire. Are you going to suggest now that dinosaurs could breathe fire because that is also something that we dreamt up in medieval times?
Well, yeah. I mean, that's...
See?
I hear what you're saying,
good.
But I think they probably could have elaborated some of the particular traits of those dinosaurs.
Okay, so where
maybe they could. Maybe they could breathe fire. Who knows?
Well, I think that paleontologists know with a degree of certainty that dinosaurs that couldn't breathe fire. But I will put your question in this form, if you approve, Jasper. It's how did humans dream up dragons if they never saw a dinosaur?
Yes, I accept that one.
Because that insulates you from the slightly eccentric conclusion you've arrived at, which is that humans and dragons must have been around at the same time, or humans and dinosaurs must have been around at the same time.
It's a very rare thing that I'm accused of being eccentric.
There's a third possibility, of course, which is that you haven't explored yet, which is that dragons are actually real.
Yes.
But you make that sound, you respond to that as if it would be a bonkers suggestion, and yet the idea that humans and dinosaurs were knocking around at the same time, you feel is actually self-evident.
Yeah.
Okay, you're on the list. There we go. Dinosaurs. How could we dream up dragons if we'd never seen a dinosaur? 0345 6060973. If you go to Pompeii or some historical site that predates the introduction of the Gregorian calendar, then what date are you seeing when it says that this, I don't know, building burnt down in 100 AD, January 100 AD? What calendar? What are they talking about? How have they arrived at that date? When do bananas get measured for calorific content? Because they will get lighter as they ripen, and presumably their chemical constituency must change as well. Has a snooker referee ever dropped a clanger? And why do ferrets get special mentions in legislation regarding the transport of animals out of this country, out of the UK? Karen is in Bergen in Norway. Karen, question or answer?
Question, please, James.
Carry on.
My dad took this with him to the grave, and I've never been able to find out the answer. When we were watching the television when we were younger,
yes,
I think it was usually a film, he would say, "There's a dot coming up in the top right-hand corner now."
Yes.
And a a ring would appear in the top right-hand corner.
Yes.
And we never knew how he could predict it. And I've tried Googling and I've tried asking. My dad was a photographer.
Right.
So I'm guessing he had some inside information.
And would he get it?
A photographer.
Would he get it right to the second, to the nanosecond, or would he just say it's about to come up and then it would?
No. He would say, and he would falter it. There's a dot coming up in the right-hand corner.
Yes. Do you know your impression is so uncanny? You've just reminded me. I've got John Culshaw coming in at 2:00 to do full disclosure.
How do you know it was uncanny? Because you didn't know my dad.
Yeah, but that was the joke. That's the second joke I've had to explain today. Neil's been in touch to say, I love you, James, but it's Lord Farquhar, not Lord Farfar. I'm not going to explain the joke. If you don't get the joke, I'm not going to explain it. But I promise you, Neil, that I didn't make an accidental mistake. So I know this. I think I know this. Because it would only be on movies, right? It wouldn't be on...
I think so.
And we're going back a while. So it would be an indication to the projectionist that there's a real change coming up. Right-hand corner of the frame.
Top right-hand corner.
Yeah, Q dots they're called. So,
okay.
so it would be an indication to the projectionist that there was a real change coming up.
Right. So how did they know? There must have been some kind of signal before it in a certain amount of seconds.
I think that did he wear a watch?
Yes.
So I think that the real length would be consistent. So he would know that exactly 20 minutes after the last dot, the next dot would appear.
No, he wouldn't have been able to do it to the second.
Yes, of course he would.
He wouldn't. This was pre-digital.
Yeah, but he had a second hand.
No.
And also,
I don't buy that.
What you've been a bit strident, if you don't mind me saying so.
I don't buy it.
Okay.
I mean, I think I agree that with it may have something to do with the length of the reel, but I think there must have been some indication somewhere prior to the dot coming up.
Okay. There's two dots.
And also, the lovely lady I spoke to on the phone, she had a similar...
That's no lady, that's my producer.
Your lovely producer had a similar
question.
There's two dots. Coloured thing.
There's two dots. There's two dots about 5 seconds apart, and you never noticed the first one, but your dad did because he was looking out for it, and then he would...
Are you guessing this, or do you know this?
This is a well-known fact.
But you didn't know that well-known fact about a minute ago.
I'd forgotten. I'd forgotten because I was so distracted by the quality of your impersonation of your father. It was like he was in the room with us. That's why I got distracted, Karen. But that's 2 dots. I mean, I'm deploying Occam's razor. If you're going to reject my answer, and you're perfectly entitled to, because he would have had to be almost watching his watch instead of the film religiously.
Exactly.
But he won't have done it every single time. He'd just done it when he wanted to amuse you, and impress and amuse you. So that he would notice the first dot, which let's say is 10 seconds out from the reel change, which is telling the projectionist to look out for the final dot, which is 1 second out from the reel change, and then the projectionist presses the button at that exact moment, and the reel changes, and you don't know it. And because they're still using the prints that were used in the cinemas in early television broadcasts of the same films, you get in the dots on the TV broadcast.
I'd like that confirmed by somebody who's not you, please, a real person.
What do you mean, somebody who's not me? That's blatant discrimination. All right.
You can't know everything about everything.
I think I'm right, but I can't prove it, so I will respect your request for
thank you.
External validation. I spend my life in search of external validation. Thank you, Karen. It is coming up to 12:30, and Amelia Cox has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
33 minutes after 12. We've got some cracking questions today. Let's hope that the answers... It's because it's not always the case. It's one of the great joys, isn't it, of Mystery Hour. There's absolutely no relationship between quality of question and quality of answer. Sometimes you get a question, you think, oh, that's brilliant. And the answer comes in and you go, whatever. And sometimes you get a question, you think, that is absolute toilet. And then the answer comes in and you go, well, I never... In fact, quite often, the more I mock a question, the more fascinating the actual answer turns out to be, which is why we keep turning up every week, I think, isn't it? Tom's in Winchester. Tom, question or answer?
Hi, James. Answer, please.
Carry on.
It's the dinosaurs versus dragons question.
All right, good luck.
It's a great question, but there's about 60 million years worth of difference between humankind and dinosaurs being around. That's been shown numerous scientific studies.
Yeah, but... 60 million, I mean, come on. I'm trying to imagine what Jasper would say at this point. That's because that's what people think, Tom.
It is, and that would be a very long genetic memory, but I can offer a suggestion.
Yes.
So, fossils. Paleontology's only been around for a couple of 100 years, but surely for centuries, people have been finding the fossilised remains of these massive dinosaurs and going, what on earth is this?
Yes, it's a dragon.
Exactly.
And a storyteller would terrify the population into giving them money by telling them there's a dragon around the corner, and unless
spin the yarn,
get him to go away.
Exactly. So it just builds up. And if you've got real life examples like the Komodo dragon around anyway, it's got something physical to relate to, so people can grow.
So it's not a mystery at all.
Exactly. I
love it. Qualifications?
It's got a degree in archaeology, but don't use it, sadly.
Well, you just did.
Yeah.
Kind of. I've got a question for you. It's about my colleague Keith.
Ooh.
So Keith said to me in the break, he said, he does this quite often. He said, did you know that George Washington didn't know that dinosaurs existed because he died before they were discovered, before the fossils were discovered? Do you see what I mean?
I do.
Why would he choose George Washington?
That's a very good question. I don't know the answer for that,
I don't either. He's stumbled across this nugget of knowledge that used George Washington as the lens through which to reflect the relatively recent discovery of dinosaur fossils in the way that
Why not Henry VIII?
That's exactly what I said. Those are my exact words.
What does he hate about the British monarchy?
Yeah, why do you hate England? That's another St. George's Day tradition that we've managed to observe 24 hours late. Tom, thank you. Round of applause for Tom.
Thank you.
Thank you. 12:35 is the time. Nicola is in Margate. Nicola, question or answer?
It's an answer, James.
Carry on, Nicola.
To the lady's question about the projection, you're absolutely right. I always wanted to say those words.
Yes, I apologise.
There's 2 dots. We used to call them cigarette burns.
Okay, yes.
And there's 2 of them. I forget, because it's a long time since I've been a projectionist, but I forget how far they are from the end of the reel.
Sure.
But there's 2, and there's one that tells you the next one's coming up. And then the second one is the cue for you to pull the lever and change to the next reel.
And so the length of the reels could be different, but the length of the gap between the first dot and the second dot would always be the same.
Exactly, and the length from the end of the reel was always the same.
So Dad would just spot the first dot and then say to the kids, "There's a dot coming up in 3, 2, 1," and boom, there it would be.
Exactly,
Love
in the
it.
old dad.
Well, great dad,
style.
though, eh? Great dadding.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Mystery, magic dad. Qualifications?
I'm a cinematographer now, but I used to be a projectionist to get me through film school.
Oh, how exciting. Where did you work as a projectionist, if you don't mind me asking?
In Sydney, Australia,
okay.
in one of the art house cinemas back in the day when we, did film.
How does it work now? Is it just one button operates all the projectors in all of the multiplexes?
I think it's, digital buttons. It's all,
still projections at the... so if you see an advertisement for a film that is going to be shown in, what millimetre would it be? What would be, exciting for film buffs if they say we're going to see
Well, the IMAX does a lot of 70mm, 65mm, so that's all.
But in terms of old school, so I went to see Gladiator.
35mm.
35mm. I went to see Gladiator at the Prince Charles Cinema in Leicester Square in 35mm, and that would have had an old school projection in place, wouldn't it? An old school projector.
Yes.
How exciting.
Exactly.
What a brilliant answer and a brilliant question. That's cheered me right up. Have a round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nicola. That's nice as well, because it gives Karen a sort of fond memory of her old man as well. That is going to take some beating. Byron is in Swindon. Byron, question or answer?
It's a question, James.
Carry on, Byron.
Maybe your past caller could answer it. Film credits.
Yes.
Whether you're watching a film, a UK film, a US film, a film from any other country in the world.
Yes.
The end credits always seem to follow the same structure. Usually end credits will start rolling, a film by so-and-so director, and then it'll be the order of the cast.
I don't think you're right.
And no?
No. Because I'm a bit of a... Would you describe yourself as a credits geek or not?
Well,
honestly,
it came
you
up
have
when
to
we
be
were
honest.
watching it. No, I'm not.
But see, I am a credits geek. I often sit... I'm fascinated by the credits because I've got this weird... I think I've recognised someone or I can't remember who someone is. I almost always... Well, in fact, one of the things that annoys me most about Netflix is the fact that it starts...
You can skip.
I can't work out how to go back sometimes. I want to watch the flipping credits, but I can't because it's already skipped onto the next episode in the series. So I mean, there might be a more popular way of doing it, but it's certainly not true that they all do it in the way that you describe, because sometimes it takes ages for the cast to appear.
I always see them coming up right after sort of a film by. It usually just comes up cast in order of appearance.
Maybe usually, but definitely not always. Sometimes you get all sorts of gubbins there before they actually give you the cast. Presumably, more often than not, because they've given, if it's quite a small cast, they've given you the whole thing before the film even starts. You've got all the stars' names listed at the top of the film, haven't you?
Yeah, but then you'll have the music. You'd have the music that was in a film towards the end.
Yeah, that's usually true.
You'll have the logos of different companies or different studios, production companies that have towards the end, and then you'll have the Humane Society saying, if it's a film
animals
that
were harmed in the making of this film. So, what's the question?
Well, the question is, why is it structured in a similar format, whether or not the films, regardless of the film studio?
How do they decide what order to put the credits in? I mean, the fact that they're not always in the same, maybe you're 80% right, I'm not sure, but I will...
it's just a question that I've always, an answer that I've always wondered.
But isn't it interesting that I could tell you weren't a credits geek, though, from this question?
Well, it's only because, we've got a little bit of a ritual in our family watching Marvel films with the kids at the weekend, and obviously you have to sit through the credits to get to the
little bit at the end, the extra scene,
the extra snippet at the end.
Yes, exactly.
And actually, to your last caller as well, I had to spend ages going through the Gladiator end credits because my cousin worked on it.
And you were looking for your cousin?
Just to see her name on it as well.
That's lovely. Look at that. Look at the way those three calls, you two calls and me have combined there to create a little moment of family magic.
That's called a link, isn't it, in your industry?
I don't know what it... No, that's let me check with Keith. That's not a link, is it? That's just a coincidence. That's the same in any. That's the same in any industry. So, a charming coincidence. But Byron, you're on the list. I mean, who decides might be a question to ask, or if not who, then how do they decide the order in which the credits appear at the end of a film? I need to remind you of what's still I've got. It's only 12:41. I can squeeze in some more questions as well. 0345 6060 973. We don't know about the ferrets. So John in Thetford, where there are a lot of ferrets in Thetford Forest, is adamant that when he made inquiries about taking his dog on holiday, he discovered that the legislation covering the transit of pets to the continent also includes ferrets. So it's dogs, cats and ferrets, which is quite an odd hat trick. Dogs and cats, absolutely standard, although many people probably wouldn't take their cat on holiday as many as their dog. But why are ferrets there? 0345 60 973. Has a snooker referee ever dropped a ball into the middle of a pack of reds while respotting the ball after it's been potted? At what point should you weigh a banana in order to calculate its calorific content? Because its weight changes. And yet when they publish it's a tricky one. I told Tyler he wouldn't get an answer, but I'm sticking by him on this. So they tell you how many calories there are in a banana. When do they make that measurement, that calculation? Because if you keep a banana on your windowsill for a week, it will be about 20% lighter at the end of the week than it was at the beginning. So it can't possibly have the same calorific content. How do they, when they tell you a date from like first 200 or 300 years of the Common Era, what calendar are they using? Because the Gregorian calendar didn't kick in until the 5th or 6th century of the Common Era. I think I've got that right. No, it's longer than that. It's about a millennium. And anyway, what calendar are they using when you go to Pompeii and they tell you what date it is on a sign? Dinosaurs question, TV question, and film credits. You just heard that one. You don't need a recap. Jamie's in Romford. Jamie, question or answer?
Question, James.
Carry on, Jamie.
Why is the order from 1 to 9, the numerical order, different on a phone to a calculator? It's given us a big problem in the office.
Why?
We get used to one thing, and then you go to another, and then it's just, no, you do. All day long, I've got to keep changing my mindset for it.
What, 1, 2, 3, so a phone is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Exactly. And then the calculator's upside down, or the phone's upside down, whatever way you want to sit. But O's, zeros in the same place.
What is the most logical way to do it, in your opinion?
It leads me on to a second question, thinking,
You're not allowed a second.
I know,
You're not allowed
but that might be the answer. What came first?
The chicken or the egg? The calculator or the phone? I think I might know this.
Why would you not have it the same?
Is it because, and I'm thinking out loud here, of the rotary dial?
The original phone?
Yeah. Where zero...
one would be over on the left.
Well, it would be at the bottom of the dial, wouldn't it? So it would go...
So you're saying the phone...
Let me just... So it would... No, that doesn't work, does it, at all?
But then why wouldn't you just copy that over to the calculator?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well,
we don't know the answer.
No, we don't.
It's been bugging us for a while.
It's a good question with the caveat that quite often when I think it's a good question, it isn't, and when I think it's a bad question, it is. But for the time being, I think it's a good. I can't believe we've never had it before. Which means,
I thought that.
Which means we probably have.
Why you haven't?
We probably have. I mean, there's no way anyone in the office has been listening for all the years that we've been doing this nonsense. It's absolutely impossible. But I will find out, or at least I will try. 12:44. There's a good chance we'll get an answer. Why is the phone layout? Why is the numerical layout on a phone different from a calculator, given that it's exactly the same numbers that are in play? Nice one, Jamie. Take care. It is 12:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
A little bit of ferret-related content before we get back to Mystery Hour. Alex has been in touch to say ferret regulations must be relatively new. My uncle once delayed a flight from Leeds Bradford to Dublin for 2 hours in the late 1970s. He was taking a male ferret to Dublin for his father-in-law. He'd booked a separate seat for the animal, and the staff said he couldn't take it. He argued that there was nothing in their literature about this, and in the end they had to take off with the ferret, which had started to give off a rather pungent smell by then. And then my friend Scott, who doubles up as my Uxbridge correspondent and is fascinated, as am I, by the differences in our various educations. He has weighed in with, your kid with a ferret story is the most perfect distillation of private school I've ever heard. At a normal school, and I can live with that distinction, at a normal school he would have just been called Smelly Ferret Boy for the rest of his life, but at your school he went on to become David Attenborough's producer. You raise a valid point, but I don't think it would have been outstanding behaviour in Norfolk. I mean, you're being a bit Uxbridge there, mate, I think. You're not being very rural. I think in rural schools, having a ferret wouldn't be as remarkable as it would have been in an urban school. And I was at a rural school, remember. We even had beagles, which is a perfect distillation of private school, a school with its own pack of beagles. Jay's in Coventry. Jay, question or answer?
It's a Stewart's inquiry.
What?
Yes.
Go on then.
So, dragons.
Yeah.
Okay, so the guy you had before, as you know, it's a good idea. This idea that they found a dinosaur bone, and then the problem is that we have dragon stories all around the world.
Right.
And we didn't have like newsletters that were sending out or email groups saying, "Hey, look what we've found," and each quarter's made their thing.
Fair enough.
So I spend a lot of time talking about dragons at work, and the current belief is that it was just the biggest, scariest thing that people could come up to in storytelling.
But that doesn't work, because that makes it... I mean, so all these different parts of the world had the same conclusion about what the biggest, scariest thing would be?
Not really, because all dragons around the world are all very different to each other.
Oh,
but
well,
the one
of course
that we
they will.
kind of typically think of, what's scary? Snakes. Okay? Yeah. What makes them scary? Let's make them fly.
Yeah.
Okay, and let's make them as big as a house. You know, and it kind of builds and builds and builds.
Hey, what if they breathe fire?
And that's it. It's actually even scarier, right?
Yeah.
I think you said it yourself in the answer when you said to him. You said that it was some the storytellers were using it to scare other people.
It is pretty good, isn't it? I mean, what else could they have used? Something that no one has ever thought of. It just wouldn't be scary.
Yeah, and it may have been backed up by finds of big bones and stuff like that. But
exactly. You see, there's a dragon. There's a dragon. You see, there's proof that there's a dragon, or a mysterious fire.
Yeah.
So there you go. There's proof the dragon was here last night. Someone's just burnt down a barn. If I just burnt down your barn, and the cops were getting a bit close, the medieval cops, I'd say it was a dragon, mate. It was a dragon.
Medieval cops everywhere.
Yeah, they got it. Qualifications?
I'm a knight for a living.
Are you? Warwick Castle, is it?
I work with Warwick Castle and English Heritage and lots of different places. So I work with a group called the Warwick Warriors.
Are you allowed to call yourself a knight if you haven't actually been dubbed?
No one's called me on a planet yet, but I've normally got a sword on me and stuff like that. So
don't mess with Jay. That knight, is it Sir Jay, or do you have a different name when you're knighting?
It's often Sir Space J, Sir because I'm a knight, J because that's my name. If not, everyone thinks I'm Eastern European.
That'll do nicely. Round of applause for Sir J, or Sir Space J. I like that. That's pretty cool to drop into the conversation. I talk about dragons a lot at work. I was desperately trying to think of something funny to say at that point, but as you'd have gathered, I failed. Not for the first time. Mark's in Sudbury. Mark, question or answer?
Answer.
Carry on.
Hello, James.
Hello, Mark.
Yeah, the simple answer to the ferret question is dogs and cats and ferrets are the same category when it comes to moving of animals when they are property. Beyond that, it gets a bit weird. So if you're ready, I can explain why.
Yeah, I'm ready. Why did you sound like you were yawning?
No, I'm anxious.
Oh, don't be. It's only me, seriously. And you're the expert here. There's no doubt about that. Go on then, why?
So animal is a very poorly defined word in English law. And depending on what law you're talking about, depends on whether or not you're dealing with an animal. The classic example is if you hit, and I'm sorry if this raises any concerns with people, because I don't mean to upset anyone.
Is that a trigger warning? Is that a trigger warning?
It's a trigger warning.
Okay, trigger warning.
If you hit a cat with your car...
Whoa! I did not see that coming. Carry on.
Because a cat is not an animal, according to the Road Traffic Act, no problem.
Right.
But if you steal somebody's cat, that's their property, so you can get prosecuted for that. And of course, a cat has a backbone, which means for the purposes of cruelty to animals, it is an animal for those laws.
God, you weren't kidding when you said it was complicated.
Well, yeah. So when you mention animals in law, you've got to be really, really specific, which is why they specifically mention ferrets, dogs and cats in transport. And transportation of animals, of course, you need a licence for moving pigs, and then a separate licence for moving other types of cattle, depending on what cattle might mean. So, and these laws go back a long time. And you can imagine in the 60s, if you said to somebody you're going to get on a plane with a pet, they'd look at you like you were mad unless you were very wealthy. And wealthy people often had ferrets and houses abroad.
Well, I never. And they take their ferrets with them to their foreign houses.
Well, how else are they going to, engage in those country pursuits in those other...
That's a very good point. Well, personally, old boy, I'd get my gamekeeper to transport the ferrets to France. I wouldn't be carrying them myself. But that doesn't change your point, really, does it?
Yes, but one doesn't transfer one's ownership of one's property to one's gamekeeper, James, as you would know.
No, because it would still be my ferret, even though it was in my gamekeeper's trousers.
Indeed.
Qualifications? I mean, you've kind of hinted, but just to be clear...
Yeah, I was a police officer a long time ago, and we covered this in police training because it is very much a policing problem.
Did you ever encounter a ferret while you were on duty?
Yes, it didn't go up my trousers, thankfully. Thankfully it was in a cage.
Right.
I stayed well away.
Well, you would. A round of applause, please, for Mark. There's a lovely bird song in the background as well, which always, I don't know, always brings a bit of sunshine into the studio. John's in Hounslow. John, question or answer?
It's an answer, James.
Carry on, John, mate, in your own time.
It's about bananas, and the green banana contains a great deal of starch and a little bit of sugar and some water. As it ripens, the starch turns into sugar and the water evaporates.
Ah.
And the glycemic load goes up because there's more sugar, which is absorbed more quickly.
And a clue there as to why you know this, I think.
Pre-diabetes.
There we go.
I'm supposed to look after my diet.
Well, please carry on looking after your diet. But what we don't know is at what point in this ripening cycle the banana powers that be calculate how many calories there are in the average banana. You got a round of applause anyway. I'm just clarifying my earlier point to Tyler that it was probably going to be impossible to answer his question.
It's not a per gram quantity that you can sensibly define because it's going down all the time.
No, but they do, because if you buy them in a supermarket,
carbohydrates and sugar quantities are changing.
Exactly. And that is the point of the question, but it's also, I think, why it's unanswerable. John, have a round of applause on me.
Okay.
You mentioned your qualifications. Look after yourself, please, John. It is 12:56, and from John to John. This one's in Highgate. John, question or answer?
It's an answer.
Carry on.
And it's relating to the film credits.
Carry on.
The the end film credits do have a structure to them, and they would start with the actors. You will notice that obviously the director, maybe the photographer, is at the front.
Yes.
And what you'll then find is that the much older films, they would have probably had the actors at the beginning of the film and not the end credits.
Yes. But I'm sure I've seen modern films where I get a lot of crew before I get cast.
Are they film credits?
Yeah. Oh, you mean as opposed to TV?
Exactly.
Oh, that was quite a good point, actually. That's the thing about being a credits geek, is sometimes you remember the credits more than whether it was a film. What are your qualifications?
I've just had one other bit to it.
Yeah, fill your boots, John.
The reason why there are film credits is when the film industry moved from New York to California, the solicitors stayed in New York, and they then knew who to pay because they had a credit.
Wow, so the credits was like a payroll.
Exactly.
That's brilliant. Qualifications?
I work in the film industry, renting equipment.
That'll do nicely. Have a round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tony's in Hawley. Tony, question or answer?
It's an answer, James.
Carry on, Tony.
It's a snooker one, James.
Yes.
So, if the referee was to drop the balls on the balls, I have seen it on a tour match. Couldn't tell you when it was. It was a few years ago.
Doesn't matter. I believe you.
Okay. If he was to drop the balls, then he would. There's also an official scorer who's in charge of the scoring, so he would get a mirror image of it on the telly, on the separate side telly, and put them back where they would have roughly have been. Also, the referee can offer a re-rack, so he would say to both the opponents, he would say, look, sorry about that, should we have a re-rack? If it was early starting, most players would go, yes, let's have a re-rack. Or, that's what would normally happen. Yes.
Qualifications?
Referee lots of snooker matches for 40 years, only at sort of county level.
Okay. Do you play as well?
I do play, yes. I've been playing since I was sort of 15 when my dad got me a little table.
What's your highest break?
91.
Whoa!
So a few years ago, it was against ex-father-in-law, so I don't think that went down too well.
Do you think that contributed to the breakdown of the marriage?
Probably not, no, but that's another story for another day. Can I just say one quick thing, though?
Yeah, of course you can.
I've called you twice to get answers.
Yes.
And I've got through. He didn't even go to the engaged tone, James. So the guy that answered, was it like 99% of the questions?
He said he knows the answers to 50 to 75% of all the questions, but he can never get through.
I'll let him off then, 75%.
He can never get through. And you've got a 100% record. Shot 2, scored 2. Look at that.
Yeah, exactly.
What's your secret?
luck.
Round of applause.
I didn't think I'd get through. It was 20 minutes ago. I didn't think I'd even get through, and straight through.
And here you are. Round of applause for Tony there. And words of encouragement for everybody else as well. That's a lovely little moment. That is it. I'll give it to Jay. Jay the Knight. That'll be nice, I think. Did he, I don't know if he, yeah, that'll do. Anyway, if you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a range of podcasts, including James O'Brien Daily, the best bits of my show, in 60 minutes every day. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. I'm off to interview John Coleshaw for a forthcoming edition of Full Disclosure. Tom Swarbrick will be with you at 4, and Sheila Fogarty is with you now.
James O'Brien on LBC.